Here.
See if I may have the old reports, but I don't have the old plans, so if
You're welcome to go through. Did you go through our file?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I asked Richard to get me out the plans.
Right.
And that's
Okay.
all we had. Maybe I'll call Sionis and ask him for
yeah.
a copy of the plan.
Just turned off. Okay, we're on the record.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting is posted in the lobby and also published in the local paper. We are being streamed live on Channel 34 and also on montclair.peg.tv. Just a few opening remarks. To let you know as to what we're going to be doing this evening, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and the meaning of that is that this board has powers and procedures that resemble a court. And we are obligated to objectively determine facts and comments. And so what you present to this board needs to be limited to what the board can legally consider in making a determination that will result in a public action. As to the order of how we proceed, the applicant course, has been in the process of presenting its case and will continue this evening. We will try and get through the applicant's witnesses this evening, and we also have to hear from the HPC with respect to a revised report on this project. And normally speaking, we would hear the applicant's case first, and if there are questions to be asked of the applicant, we want those questions to be with respect to the testimony that the witnesses for the applicant gives this evening. We may hear from expert witnesses, and the board has the opportunity to ask those witnesses questions. And after the board is finished asking the witnesses questions, that's when the public has the opportunity to ask questions. As a member of the public, if you're not a witness in the case, you really only have two opportunities to speak. At the end of the testimony, you're given the opportunity to ask questions, and then at the end of the case, you're given the opportunity to make a public comment about the case. When it's time for you to either ask a question or give testimony, we ask that you come forward to the microphone and that you clearly state your name and your address, and that you express your opinions and be considerate in terms of the time that you take in expressing your opinion or your questions, and try and keep things as concise and to the point as you can, to give everybody the opportunity to be heard if they want to be heard. In general, we are going to start limiting statements to 3 minutes. We are flexible with this depending on the amount of the audience that wishes to be heard. So bear this in mind when you come up to speak. Objectors, formal objectors to the application can be represented by counsel and are given the opportunity to present their case to the board after the applicant's case is in. And when we say objectors, we're basically talking about people who have evidence to present to the board and perhaps have alternative theories that they want to present to the board. But bear in mind that this has to be more than just your opinion. You need to have witnesses, you need to have evidence that the board can legitimately consider. If you're just wishing to express your opinion, that is what the public comment section is meant for. After the all of the public comment and the objector's case, after that is all heard, the public hearing side is closed, and the board members at that point have the opportunity to discuss the case and make a decision. The public is allowed to listen to these comments, but they're not typically allowed to participate. We would appreciate everyone's cooperation in understanding the rules and adhering to them so that the board can get to the business that it needs to get to this evening. So with that said, we can proceed to the roll call.
Chair Nguyen?
Here.
Vice Chair Broda?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Present.
Mr. Brandon is excused. Counselor Schlager?
Here.
Ms. Willis?
Here.
Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally is excused. Ms. Lockman?
Here.
Mr. Barr?
Here.
Mr. Gilmer is excused. And we have Andy Ball here tonight on behalf of Dennis Galvin.
All right. We have minutes from the August 27th meeting.
Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion to adopt the minutes? A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay.
And that brings us to the application on Lackawanna Plaza.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Thomas Troutner, again from the law firm of Chiesa, Shahenian, and Giantomasi, here on behalf of the applicant for a continuation of our hearing tonight. We appreciate the board's patience, and this evening we'd like to continue with our presenting our application. I would respectfully request to bring back Mr. Kevin Webb from Langen Engineering, our site engineer, to provide some updates and clarification regarding things that the board had requested we look into and some proposed changes to our site design. And this is relevant to our next witnesses. We have Mr. Dan Desario from Langen Engineering, who's an expert in the field of traffic and parking, who will present our testimony on a request by the board's traffic consultant that we take another look at our parking counts. I'm sorry, circulation counts, and then the parking testimony, which actually has not been entered into evidence yet. There is a parking variance that is sought in conjunction with this application, and we'll provide testimony regarding the same in terms of how we intend to park the site using a shared parking analysis. And then finally, we have Mr. Kristen Sokich from ProPark, who will provide some testimony regarding an attendant assist component of our parking plan, which will become clear once we get through the testimony. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd ask Mr. Webb to come back up.
Proceed.
And Mr. Webb, I believe you're still under oath.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
So, Janice, if I have it correctly, we're at the next exhibit would be A34.
Yes.
Before the witness begins, are there any substantive changes to the plan as presented at the last meeting or prior meeting?
There are. So we've been, and we'll go over them in a moment. This application, or these changes, will be submitted to the board in advance of the next hearing to provide for fuller analysis. But we're showing you what we're conceptually, I guess, more than looking at. This is what we intend to do. But this is without stealing his thunder. It was in response to a request to change certain entrance exits and as well as a pedestrian access point. So. Mr. Webb, why don't you walk them through what we're proposing to do? And we'll call A34 an updated site plan.
Is there a date on it?
It's site plan exhibit. It's got today's date, prepared by Langen, drawing number CS 101. It's really a simplified version of the site plan that's previously been submitted. And if I may, I'd like to just walk through a couple of the key changes that we've made in response to comments specifically discussed at the last meeting. First and foremost, our original plan showed a proposed driveway along Grove Street. In this area, originally we had just a simple 28-foot wide driveway. It had one inbound lane and one outbound lane. In response to a request from NV5, we have expanded that driveway to have dedicated lefts and rights outbound. We have done that by widening the driveway by 9 feet. We have eliminated one parking space on the south side of the site, directly adjacent to that driveway to accommodate that movement. That's really the full extent of the change in that regard. Again, it was a request, if I may paraphrase, that would provide, there was a concern that people making a left out of the driveway onto northbound Grove Street could potentially delay right-hand turners who are going southbound on Grove Street, potentially to Bloomfield. By having the segregation, those right-hand turners would be able to turn presumably without delay incurred by those lefts. So we have accommodated that change as well. One of the other changes in the same area, one of the things that we've explored at the request of the board was the ability to provide a pedestrian connection from the Grove Street sidewalk that's in the right-of-way into our site. And we have accommodated that in this area. So what we've done is we've added a sidewalk connection that parallels the right-of-way. We do have to have a retaining wall in that area between the right-of-way and our parking lot. As we described last month, or at the last hearing, our parking lot is considerably lower than Grove Street. So what we are proposing is a concrete sidewalk, essentially a ramp, that would allow pedestrians from Grove Street to basically turn right onto our site, head toward the storefront, and then there is an adequate maneuverability around the proposed staircase, or shall we say the new staircase that replaces the existing one. So it is a little bit of a farther travel than those who can use the staircase or choose to use the staircase. For instance, I know we're trying to accommodate people with carts and other things. So it's the length of the ramp itself is about 65 feet. So again, that times two, it's somewhere about 130 to 150 foot additional travel from those who might otherwise use the stairs.
Is the slope on that ADA compliant?
It will be, yes. In fact, it's very close to being flat enough that we wouldn't actually have to put handrails. But I think in this case, given the length, given the variety of people that's going to travel, we're going to design it, even if it's just about 5%, where maybe it's just under 5%, where it technically wouldn't have to have handrails. We're going to treat it like a traditional ramp with landings, handrails, the full boat. So that's really the extent of the changes to the site plan itself. We do have some other information we want to put on about truck turning movements at the loading dock, which was described. And as a prelude to that, we know there were some comments about screening and trying to minimize the driveway opening. We have done that as well. I can provide that in more detail with the next exhibit. So this would be Exhibit A35, truck turning movement exhibit. There's one, there's actually two sheets. Would they both be under the same exhibit number, Tom?
Sure. 2 sheets.
Also dated today, prepared by Lang in TM 101 and TM 102. So the configuration of the docks relative to the building has not changed whatsoever. Just to reiterate, so we are removing approximately 30 feet. It varies between 31 and 32 feet of the existing loading dock to prevent or to create a larger loading dock than what Pathmark had. This has been done in response to some potential tenant requests, and also to fit within their typical requirements for any site, and also just to ensure that we have adequate maneuverability for trucks turning in and out of the site. So what we've done, and looking at truck turning movement one, but specifically, so we have on our site, this is the property line. Our property does have access rights onto the adjacent property, but we've maintained at its closest point 135 feet from the face of the loading dock to our property line, not even considering the additional area on the adjacent property that we have rights to. Again, that's an industry standard that's traditional for even distribution warehouses and things like that. So I know I said that at our last hearing, but just want to reiterate that that this is not only appropriate for a supermarket, but even for much larger buildings that may have even more intense loading dock uses than the supermarket might. Specifically, what we've done on our last plan, this parking lot island along Glen Ridge was a little shorter. We've made it approximately 15 feet, somewhere between 10 and 15 feet longer, and we're able to screen more of the loading dock. We have included, it's a little hard to see here, but we have included also a retaining wall that will be used to screen views from Glen Ridge of the loading dock. We've added screening at the compactor pad, which is in this second loading position. So the intent would be that we have a retaining wall here to the farthest extent that we can. We'll obviously landscape in front of that wall along Glen Ridge to help soften that view and that provide some additional sense of buffering from the pedestrian environment along Glen Ridge to that loading dock. The loading dock itself is 60 feet long, accommodates 53-foot trailers, and the wall is very nearly that same length. It's not quite as long as 53 feet, but it's on the order of somewhere between like 45, 48 feet. Again, it hasn't been fully designed yet, but that's the context of our discussion and how we think that we can provide the most appropriate buffering of that area without infringing on the necessary truck turning movements. So what this exhibit shows in the four movements are basically entering movements from Glen Ridge Avenue into all four loading positions, and in each case those trucks are able to do so on our property or within the confines of our access easement on the adjacent property. In no case do the trucks enter below the lower level parking deck on the adjacent property or have to utilize the ramp that accesses the upper parking level. And again, we've shown a variety, shown some flexibility. These are not the only ways these trucks can turn into the site, but we view these as perhaps the most likely, and again, with the ability to show some variety. In each case, the trucks can make these maneuvers, assuming that there's other trailers parked at adjacent loading docks. And just for clarity, frankly, we've shown them just as single maneuvers coming into the site. So the turning movements are all based off of a 53-foot trailer vehicle, the largest that's permitted in the state. And as we've put on record before, this analysis of the software that allows us to do this is actually quite conservative, and our findings in the real world is frankly that drivers can oftentimes outperform these turning maneuvers. So again, I think we're confident based on our analysis that the trucks can access all of the loading docks, can maneuver on-site and off-site without infringing on the traveling public on Glen Ridge Avenue or without infringing on the maneuvers of the adjacent property. This is page 2, drawing number TM102, truck movement exhibit 2, dated today. So these are the exit maneuvers. In each case, as you can see, we're taking the conservative route. Essentially, these trucks are going to do a 180 onto Glen Ridge Avenue with the intent that they travel towards Grove Street and then eventually, most likely, towards Bloomfield Avenue to their next destination upon leaving the site. So again, these truck turning maneuvers are all based using that same design vehicle with the 53-foot trailers, and there's adequate maneuverability on the site without infringing on the adjacent traveling public on Glen Ridge Avenue or on the neighbor's property within the access easement. And if I may, I'm just going to go back to the prior exhibit of the site just to
A34.
A34, excuse me. One of the things that was raised in the planner's letter originally, and we committed to it, and it's shown here, is extending the taxi rideshare area to 60 feet. It's a little hard to see on this exhibit, but it is dimensioned 60 feet. We'll certainly include that as part of our future site plan submissions. We have also, as part of this plan, eliminated the colored asphalt, for which there was a considerable amount of discussion last month about the potential confusion it could raise with this challenge of trying to discern for both the motoring public and the pedestrians of the competing linear relationships of the parking lot striping. The various crosswalks are on the site with this idea of identifying the historic alignments of the rail. So at this point, we've eliminated that. We believe in the context of the discussion we had from the board of putting safety paramount over that desire to delineate the former rail alignments. There was a letter that was issued by the fire official. I believe it was August 29th. John Thomas, the fire official, had provided a letter. Tom, does that need to be entered?
So I don't have a physical copy with me, but on August 29th, Janice, hopefully you have the...
I have it. If you want, we probably should mark it for the record. This would be a 36.
So, and if I may.
Sure. No,
Sure. This is germane to the question that was put forth about whether or not the height of the existing rail canopies could remain and still have provide the fire department emergency access with their vehicles. So I'm quoting from his letter, August 29th. This again is authored by John Thomas, the fire official, to the planning board. Dear Planning Board, after meeting with the engineer for the Lackawanna Plaza project about the concrete canopies, I referred them to the United States Department of Transportation height requirements. The United States Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration's vertical clearance states that any overhead items or wires that covers any area that vehicles can travel under must be a minimum height of 14 feet. This will only apply if the concrete canopies are over any part of the parking lot or roadways in the parking lot. If the concrete canopies hang over the pedestrian walkway, it could then be at the height that the State of New Jersey Uniform Construction Code require. Signed, John Thomas, fire official. So I think I quoted that letter really just to reiterate that our prior testimony that we had paraphrased his recognition that none of the parking lot, not just a limited portion of the parking lot that may be designated as a fire lane, but any of the concrete canopies that, and we believe they're all less than 14 foot clear, that they cannot exist within the parking lot and still maintain safe access for the emergency vehicles. So again, I think it really just clarifies the point we had previously made. One of the other items, Mr. Watkinson had requested some additional information at the last hearing about our ability to locate existing culverts that are on approximately the north side of the site, more or less paralleling Glen Ridge Avenue, and then one on the southern part of the site that more or less follows the Bloomfield Avenue alignment. We are working with our site utility location subcontractor on the methodology and how we're going to do that. We'll provide those details and certainly coordinate with Mr. Watkinson offline at in-person meetings to review that. But we think at a minimum it's going to include likely some ground penetrating radar, accompanied by likely video inspection of the culverts themselves that are coordinated with survey upon ground level. And then eventually, prior to construction, we'll likely have some soft dig and test pits to confirm the location at key locations where the existing infrastructure is closest to our buildings. So again, we'll continue to endeavor to put a more formal scope for that and submit it to Mr. Watkinson for his review, if not the results themselves. So in one last item related to the site, there was some discussion at the last hearing about site lighting. As was presented by Mr. Stevie as part of his testimony and some of his exhibits, we showed a potential solution of actually attaching lights to the existing columns that would remain. What was unknown at that time, but I can provide some detail on, was whether or not doing that would result in a compliant lighting levels within the parking area. I can confirm that it does. We have evaluated that, and we can certainly provide such details as part of our next submission. So it is our belief that the adding lights to those columns themselves and the extension arms to them, if anything, it actually provides more intense light levels than we were able to achieve if we were to leave them off then. So it would be our preference to, within the area where the existing columns are to remain, that design will include lighting added to those columns in the absence of any of the pole-mounted lights that we have in the balance of the parking lot. So it would be a combination of both. It would be a fixture similar to what Mr. Stevie had provided, and again, my testimony is that we're able to provide compliant lighting levels in the parking lot in that area without having to supplement lighting with additional pole-mounted fixtures.
And Mr. Webb, there's just a couple other questions that board members had raised, just to revisit. There was a question regarding, to the extent we were having discussions with a prospective tenant for the site, what that prospective tenant might estimate would be in terms of operations, the frequency of deliveries and types. And were you able to have a conversation that sheds any light that we could at least give by way of approximation to the board?
We were, and again, in the absence of a signed lease, the operators we're talking to are unwilling to commit to particular numbers, but we did talk in generalities about what the common expectation would be for sort of the demands of the loading dock itself. So we have 4 loading docks. It was estimated that on a given day, it would be likely 10 tractor trailers per day, all of whom would use the 53-foot trailers that I described before. In addition to those tractor trailers, it's likely that they would have approximately 5 or 6 direct service delivery box trucks from independent vendors, for instance, soda vendors and things like that, who then would wheel their deliveries up the ramp that's provided as well. Those direct store delivery box trucks typically have a very quick turnaround, and it's frankly something that we were given guidance from them that they really manage, how they're parked and how they interact within the dock themselves. They don't, it's not expressed that they needed to have dedicated parking spaces themselves for those vehicles, but they would be a part of the overall management strategy. In terms of the timing of the deliveries, the expectation is that the vast majority of those deliveries would occur during normal business hours, but they could, and I want to underscore this, is that the deliveries can happen at any part of the day. Could be earlier in the morning, it could be later in the evening as well. None of the operators are willing to commit to a specific loading window, if you will.
Would that be Monday through Friday, or can deliveries be made on a Saturday?
I think deliveries could happen 7 days a week. I think particularly if we think about the dairy and produce things that have a higher turnover, quicker or shorter shelf life and things, I mean, there's potential that it could be deliveries on any of those 7 days that the store's operating.
How do those loading dock, this new loading dock configuration, how does that benefit, or is it detrimental to deliveries for the Pig and Prince, which is on the opposite end of this?
It's the Pig and Prince deliveries. There is an opportunity. I think the short answer is it's no detrimental effect to them whatsoever. The plan has been for the Pig and Prince deliveries that there is an existing loading door in this area, referring back, I guess, back to 835 or 834, excuse me. And so there would be deliveries from the back of Pig and Prince through this area, and that again would also have to be managed with the deliveries to the other retail stores and things like that. So
is there proximity then to Pig and Prince, or is this a lot further than what it currently is for them to receive deliveries?
Well, I think currently I think they take deliveries informally right at their back door, is my understanding. So it would be farther than that, but it would also be formalized to something that's not part of, it doesn't intermingle with the traveling public in that parking lot.
So, Mr. Webb, in discussions with your prospective tenant, I guess at the last meeting, it was stated that you would determine, based on the tenant's preference, how they're going to handle deliveries or pickups from people who order food and then pick them up. Where do people pick up those food? That's question number one. And sometimes grocery stores have a dedicated truck that delivers food to people. Was that talked about? How that would
It
be
has
worked?
not been discussed with them in either case.
Okay. So another question. The trucks that come in and make their deliveries at the loading dock, are they required to turn off their engines, especially refrigerated trucks? What kind of noise level comes out of that area?
I'm uncertain. Again, I'm not sure what their, and I did not ask a question about their specific laws or practices about vehicles at the dock and sort of what the protocol is for different varieties of trucks that are there.
Okay.
There was actually, there's just two other points. I don't know if that's all right. They're brief. There had been a question raised regarding whether it was anticipated that an operator would take steps to address shopping carts not leaving the site. I think the suggestion was wheel locks. Mr. Webb, my understanding is that that is likely to be employed.
Correct. That's our understanding.
And then there was similarly a question regarding how access to the pedestrian tunnel might be addressed from a security standpoint with part-time shift employees. And again, it's operator specific, but there's Mr. Webb, is it fair to say there's an anticipation that there be security fobs that would be activated, deactivated? That's the general concept?
Again, yes, that's a general concept with no firm commitment, but that's the general understanding we have with the potential tenants.
That's all we have, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know if this is for you, but at the last meeting also, just looking at the minutes here, Mr. Stevies was going to investigate whether the horse trough would be in the location that's been indicated on your site plan, or was there a better place for it? Do you remember that question?
I do,
Yeah.
and we're planning on actually coming back to you on that
okay.
one. So,
All right.
yeah.
On the 14-foot issue with the fire department, to codes. So I just want to be clear. Essentially what the response was that any area where cars can drive have to have at least a 14-foot roof. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what that means is that if parking lives within the area of where the stanchions are, that any roof that is there has to be 14 feet, correct?
Yes.
So it would be possible to create, if what you're saying, it could be possible, if need be, to create an adaptively recreated roof scenario, which I think came up once before, with some kind of decorative metal that recreated the shed area and still be in compliance with the provision from the fire department. Is that correct?
In theory, yes. It would be an adaptation to the existing column.
Exactly. So to be 100% clear, the existing, if indeed parking lives in the front under those stanchions, the concrete roofs that are there now could not survive and with parking there, and some other kind of roof setup would have to be created that potentially mirrored or replicated or adaptively showed in some capacity a shed type effect in that area, and parking could still be placed in that area as long as fire trucks can get around. Is that correct?
If the intent were to include some sort of covering of the columns, that would have to be the case. Yes.
Very good. Okay. And of course, if indeed the retail area began where the stanchions are, parking was potentially moved to another location on the site, this 14-foot issue would not come in effect because no cars would be there. Is that correct?
That's not our plan, though. I mean,
I
again,
understand.
theoretically, I guess that's true.
I'm just asking if that's if that's indeed correct for testimony.
Again, in theory, that could be done.
No cars, no issue with the 14-foot clearance, correct?
That's my interpretation of his letter, yes.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Just want to follow up on that a little bit. So it's any area where a vehicle can travel have to have a height minimum 14 feet. Does that include the parking deck in the building on the east side?
I think the area within the deck itself would fall under, because it's inside the building, falls under the Uniform Construction Code.
Okay. So this is only for exterior
Correct.
spaces. Okay. That's what I was trying to understand. If I can turn your attention back to, what is it, TM 101, Exhibit A35. The entrance movements. I can't tell if that's the entrance or the exit movements. The entrance movements, it looks like they're designed, and I'm kind of looking at the bottom right-hand movement as best as I can see it from here. It kind of looks like they're designed only when there's just a trailer in that loading area, not the cab attached to the trailer. Is that accurate?
I mean, that's the analysis that we've presented here, yes. And again, in that particular space, that dock that's the southernmost dock that's adjacent to the longer wall at the back of the store is certainly the most challenging to get into. What we've tried to do is the most simplistic single maneuver without giving, frankly, the drivers the opportunity to adjust, to make multi-point turns. You know, we've done what I would say sort of the most elegant way to get in there in single simplistic maneuvers. I mean, there would be options that would be, I would say, less understandable as we presented as exhibits that would accommodate other maneuvers. But you're correct in that the vehicle path shown in that instance would clear the trailers, but if there was a cab at one of those trailers, they would have to alter their path.
But, so just to ask the questions very simply, if there was a cab at any one of those loading docks, would the rest of the loading docks still be accessible to a driver?
They would be.
Okay, thanks.
So the easement that you've got with the adjoining property allows for the trucks to travel over the property line for the purposes of maneuvering into the loading docks?
It does. And again, I want to reiterate the point I made earlier, was that these loading docks are more than 30 feet farther away from that adjacent property line than the current configuration where Pathmark had similar trucks operating at that dock. So it is a dramatically improved condition over what existed previously.
Yeah, well, I know, but there was a problem with the adjoining property owner about the trucks crossing over the
Hence
property
the-
line, and I think part of the problem was, or part of the issue was the fact that the trucks damaged the asphalt because they're making turns and they're heavier vehicles, and it's not the type of traffic that the office building would normally have in its parking lot.
That may be possible. I don't recall that specific concern, but you may be right.
So, you know, even though it's further away, at least in 3 out of the 4 scenarios, or all of them actually, you have to cross that property line in order to maneuver. And I guess we need to just understand if that's going to be a problem with the neighbor, and if there's going to be a fight about that. So, but evidently, that'll be, we'll have to follow up with that later. I don't even see, oh, I'm sorry. I got tunnel vision, and I didn't see.
They have an easement.
Well, that's you know, and that's what I want to understand about, you know, terms of easement, reasonable use, and I mean, just because you have an easement, it doesn't give you the right to do anything. It gives you reasonable use, so I don't know we would like to know, since that's what's being proposed and if that's what we're being asked to approve, you know, I want to know how the adjoining property feels about it. So. Other questions from the board?
I just have one question. What's the height of the retaining wall around the, hiding the loading area?
It really hasn't been determined yet. I mean, I think we're open to suggesting about how high you feel it needs to be. It's essentially, it's a freestanding wall in the sense that it's not obviously retaining earth. It really is just truly a screen wall.
The screening wall.
Yeah.
So in theory, it should be tall enough to hide the trucks.
Is there a
Reasonable
limitation
extent.
on how a wall, how high a wall like that can be that close to the sidewalk? Like there are,
I don't
like
know how close is it to the sidewalk? I haven't.
Frankly, I'd have to measure. That it's within. I don't know if there may be within the ordinance limitations on the height of walls within proximity to a property line or things like that. But it's
There's a height of a maximum wall height that we have in our ordinance. So if it does exceed it, in order to screen the trucks, then we need to request a variance.
well, yeah, and that's, we're lacking the measurements.
Right. So
we can provide more color on that.
okay.
And is that, is the height requirement for both sides of it? Or I'm assuming, are these, you know, wells that you kind of drive into and they kind of decrease in elevation a little bit?
A little bit. I mean, they are traditional 4-foot docks, so the finished floor is 4 feet higher than the pavement outside. But the grade change in there between Glenridge Avenue and the building are such that I think it's going to be less of a retaining wall and more of a screen wall. There may be some
Right.
grade differential, but it's not going to. It's going to be modest relative to the wall adjacent to.
And I wasn't asking for about it more from the engineering perspective, but more for the ordinance perspective. Is it
Right.
maybe, you know, 4 feet high on one side, 6 feet high on the other one?
It has the potential to be taller on the back side, on the dock side, than it would be on the street facing.
Just want to make sure you look at that from both perspectives.
Indeed. Thank you.
And with respect to the wall, are you thinking about any decorative elements that would make it attractive, other than a blank wall?
No, I
That
think-
could be
well,
open
I-
to graffiti or whatever?
I mean, my initial idea was that it would be some sort of masonry wall to, essentially match the building in some way or be complementary to the building in some way. But we have not gone so far as to study what other elements may be appropriate there.
I thought you said that there'd be landscaping in front of
There
the
would
wall.
be landscaping in front of
So I
it.
assume you'd have a brick wall with landscape, is what you're saying.
Correct.
I mean, ultimately, we'll see elevations all around, won't we?
Yeah, because, you know, a brick wall with landscaping is still a brick wall with landscaping.
Right. I mean, because it is opposite the post office, which is a highly trafficked area.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to be some kind of attractive element.
So. Other questions from the board? There are questions from the public? You can use the middle aisle too. next time. It's okay.
Frank Rabacki, 398 up on Mountain Avenue.
Is the light on, Mr. Rabacki?
Looks like it. No? Frank Rabacki,
There we go.
398 Upper Mountain Avenue.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for putting in the ramp. It's a great idea and a great addition. Appreciate it. If you could put up that exhibit that shows the ramp and the crosswalk. My concern is the length of the crosswalk. I think previously, depending on the inner part, the outer part, it was as wide as 40, as long as 46 feet and as short as 43 feet or something like that, roughly. But now adding another lane of traffic, I'm concerned that the crosswalk's even longer. And most streets in Montclair are underneath 40 feet, so this is a very long crosswalk with a lot of traffic.
Well, that crosswalk will still only be 37 feet. I mean, the curb-to-curb distance, it was a 28-foot driveway. That's now going to be 37 feet with the addition of 9 feet.
But there's a 5-foot radius, so you're talking about the very beginning of the crosswalk, that's 37 feet. What is it on the outside of the crosswalk?
Well, it would be a few feet more on both ends, so I mean,
So it'd be like 41 or
something like that, sure.
Okay. I'm just concerned because that is the crossing distance, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 in directions of cars. You have potential for conflict because you have cars, 3 going in and out. You got 1 turning right, and you have a left-hand turn. On top of that, somebody's also going to try to make a left into the bank parking lot. So it's just something I have a concern with. You had mentioned in the last meeting about the circulation efficiency for the cars, and this was the most efficient layout. My question is this the safest circulation pattern for pedestrians? And the reason why I bring that up is because you're going to have an entrance to the supermarket, which is the primary use, and you have all those people coming from the retail and such. So the busiest part of that parking lot, pedestrian-wise, will be the drive aisle in front of the store. And then it will gradually reduce as you get further and further away. If you're bringing all the circulation by definition to the drive aisle in front of the store, instead of maybe circulating it differently, you're going to have the most conflicts there. Is there any way that you can equate the circulation efficiency of the cars with the pedestrian circulation?
Well, to start, I think in the context of the discussion when I said it was the most efficient relative to alternatives that would save more of the columns, one-way circulation, other things like that. So it was in the context of that where we had clarified, and I think it was confirmed even by Mr. Ross, that we would lose a significant amount of parking space were we to go to a one-way circulation. So I just want to make sure that that's in the proper context.
I think it was 10 to 20 spaces was the testimony.
Correct. Relative to, you're right, is that obviously the front of the store is where people are going. The majority of users of that surface lot will be accessing the grocery store through the front. That's why we've identified 2 crosswalks and put in 2 crosswalks in front of the store. This is a conventional layout for any parking lot in any commercial area. We have ample pedestrian opportunities along the front of the store, along the side of the retail. Now we have an enhanced pedestrian environment on the Grove Street side. I think we've done what's appropriate and even more to enhance and ensure that there's pedestrian safety within the parking lot.
Okay. And the only relief zones for pedestrian point of view are where the Grove Street entrance comes in and closer to Bloomfield Avenue. There are no relief zones closer between the Grove Street entrance and the storefront, the supermarket storefront, right?
There are not. I mean, there are a couple of landscape islands that could serve that in the short term, but not.
But not between the entrance and the grocery store. I thought the landscape island started at the Grove Street entrance, and there was some closer to Bloomfield. Is there one close?
No, it's as you suggest. There's ones.
The 3 in the front of the.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I got a little confused about the 14-foot issue, because that's really the crux of the issue here. Since we don't have the letter, do we have the letter as an exhibit?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take up your time reading it.
Sure.
Okay. So, I guess my question is, I got a little confused between your exchange with Mr. Schwartz. This only involves drive aisles. It doesn't involve parking areas, correct?
It involves the parking areas as well. And that's what his letter clarifies, is really anywhere where cars can go, not just drive aisles, but also within the parking spaces themselves, have to maintain the minimum 14-foot clear.
So, by that could mean there can't be any stanchions in the parking lot?
There can be stanchions, but there cannot be any sort of vertical members or any restriction of clearance in the area. That would that would
So,
really relate to the roof. There can't be anything under roof, essentially.
No, but, yes, I would think, I would find that logical if you have a drive aisle. But if you had something, if you had a,
To expedite this, that's why I was pretty specific in my testimony.
I didn't understand.
What he's saying is that there cannot be a roof or roof effect that is lower than 14 feet, and that is in the parking area itself and any drive areas, okay? It's pretty clear
So,
cut.
regardless, any asphalt space that's deemed a parking lot cannot have a 14-foot structure.
Mr. Rabaki, just to, again, I have a similar question
Okay.
because in taking a look at the way that the stanchions are made, your statement was that you didn't think that the stanchions, yeah, that they were 14 feet, that the operable passage was under 14 feet. And I'm just looking at the way that they're designed. They go up on a curve. So we're at the lowest point where they attach to the vertical pole. I can't tell whether that's 14 feet or not. It could be 12. I know it looks to be at least 12 feet based on the pictures that I can see on the internet, but I don't know whether anybody has measured it. And if this is, and what the letter says is that any overhead items or wires, and items is very vague. So I really think that we need to look at the particular provision of the regulation, and that we need a more specific interpretation, and we also need the stanchions measured to see what the clearance is, because if they are below 14 feet at the point where they attach to the vertical, then none of them can be in the parking lot. Well, again, if the fire...
It's a little vague, I agree, but...
Right, but there should be some sort of interpretation on it, and I think all I'm saying is that we need to look at it a little bit closer to understand exactly
I think what he's saying is there has to be clearance.
I hear what you're saying, but you're thinking. You said, I think what he's saying. Okay, we need to know exactly what the regulation is. So that's my point. He could very well mean that, and it's just the way that it's written. But I would like to make sure that it's not an issue.
Can we also address light stanchions then? Because they're in the parking lot, they're L-shaped, and...
Well, most of them are at least 15 feet that we have in the in our large open part. Some of them they want to go up to 21 feet, but we usually, excuse me.
No, the maximum height is 15 feet.
Maximum height is 15 feet, but depending on the way that they're designed, and it may be something that we've overlooked, and it may have to do with the fact that we have with these stanchions, we have a much more substantial overhang than we do have with a pole with a light fixture on it, even if it's on a pole. Because I don't understand why the fire department wouldn't want to have something at least as high so that they could make sure that they get their vehicle underneath. And I question whether or not the 14 feet is high enough to get a fire vehicle under there, but that's what he seems to be referencing. So we just need to understand.
I think they need 13 to 13 and a half. And I only know that because a lot of trucks in Upper Montclair. But okay, just to add to that briefly, my understanding from your testimony tonight is that if it's a parking space, if it's a drive aisle, and it's lower than 14, and you have a structure lower than 14 feet, the fire department or the code that they're basing on is objecting to it, would object to it.
That's my interpretation of his letter. Again, it's his response.
No, I understand. I
just want to clarify that it's...
okay, so if that in fact is not accurate, And I'm not trying to pose a hypothetical, but I'm trying to get, when you ask them, or when we get clarification, we get clarification, if it doesn't include the parking spaces, which is one possibility. He might come back and say, no, it doesn't include the parking spaces. It's anywhere the fire truck can drive, and obviously we're not going to drive in parking spaces normally if they're full cars. So my question is, does it apply to public parking spaces versus restricted parking, i.e. if there's valet parking? Does valet parking fall into the same code? That's my question. That I would like to ask.
Either you know or you don't.
I don't know.
No, I know he doesn't know. What I'm asking is when we get clarification, does it apply to public stalls versus
Well, I think,
restricted valet parking?
yeah, and I think what we will endeavor to do is to get absolute clarity on what this covers and what it doesn't cover. Because I don't think that this letter is enough.
Yeah.
Thank you again for putting the ramp.
In reality, they're talking about clearance, fire truck clearance to go down the line to be able to get to the building. That's what but it's still vague.
Frank Godlewski, Essex Fells. Sir, in your discussing the probes that you're doing about the underground culverts and the structures and the infrastructure and the concrete structures and even the stanchions and let's say dimensions of that, are you aware that all of these documents are public documents and we have them with the Steam Museum in Scranton? There's 666 file documents for the entire project of the station, all of the building drawings, the underground culverts, Thomas Edison's concrete drawings that predisposed electricity before the first electrical train was invented 16 years before. We have all of these documents. So are you aware that they exist and they're publicly accessible?
Well, no, and again, let me clarify that my testimony was specifically about the culverts in their current condition. And in some cases, and I think perhaps in both cases, those culverts have been altered from their original design. So my concern is not where they were many years ago, it's where they are today, and we're going to confirm that.
Okay. And also the Montclair Historical Society has copies of the drawings, and so does Cornell University.
But again, I think we're more concerned about what the actual condition is today as opposed to how they were originally designed.
May I submit the source?
Well, what is, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, am I missing the point?
Well, that the original documents are all public documents, and we have 800 of them.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. I don't think anybody's disputing that. But again, I think what we want to know and what we need to know is what's there today, because that's what's going to be impacted by the project.
Please do include the working drawings of the stanchions and the dimensions.
Well, that may be good, but I mean, we can just measure them too.
Okay.
You know.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Kerry Heller, 1 Greenwood, the neighbor next door. I don't think by anything other than omission, I don't think it was intentional, but we never got to see these drawings that we've been asking for some months, and these are the articulation drawings, so I'll have some questions today. I hope we won't need an expert, but I do have some questions.
I'm sorry, you agreed to an easement without drawings being presented to you?
No, sir. The easement long goes before me. Long before.
Ah, okay, got it.
Long before.
I thought this was a new easement as
No.
of...
No, this is
There's a car dealership that dates back to the 1920s that was here. Question. You referenced 4 loading docks, which I see on there, and you also referenced the additional 2. but you don't really show how they're going to be used. The question was asked by someone about Pig and Prince, but how are the other 2 loading docks? And you might describe to the board and to the public that there are 6 loading docks?
Okay. We've put that testimony on previously.
Well, we have changes, so...
Not changes to those docks, though.
If I may ask, I'm not sure how the 2 loading docks perpendicular to the street are being used, otherwise for the reference this evening, that I think there are additional stores, there's building coming down, the property is going to be utilized differently. I'm not suggesting that they not be there. What I'm going to lead toward, if you're to answer the question, is to see how the intersection of 4 loading docks, 2 loading docks that are perpendicular to each other, a center area that's being described that is larger, and is also going to house 6 other box trucks of some sort that are going to come in during the day. How is it all going to be utilized? And then I'll lead to my deck, my ramp, and other areas. But let's start with the 2 loading docks. You're not showing any truck articulation to those 2 loading docks.
We are not. I mean, the question that was raised at the time was, how do they serve the grocery store? And that's what we presented.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, there's 2 other loading docks. They're not showing how trucks are getting into those 2 loading docks. I'm going to get to the other 4 in a moment.
Okay, well, thank you. There aren't any changes that are being proposed to those 2 loading docks that you're talking about, are there, gentlemen?
There are not.
So is it reasonable to assume that those loading docks are going to operate as they do today for the Pig and Prince?
First, it's a new. I'm not suggesting the building not be used.
I'm just asking the question.
We don't know how it's being used.
Right, but I'm not asking you the question. I'm asking the applicant the question, since this is on the applicant's property. You're not proposing any changes. So is that the anticipation that they would operate as they've always operated?
That's correct.
Okay. So with that statement, then
we would like
where do you want to take it next?
To know how the intersection of the 4 new loading bays are going to intersect with its truck loading, with the 2 loading bays, if I may, for all that are coming into this area in here, which is borderline easement and their property, which they're absolutely entitled to use. But I'm trying to figure out how all these movements are taking place while there's also the 6 box trucks. There's been no testimony how long the trailer trucks are going to stay. We know there's going to be plus or minus 10 a day. I'll tell you there's going to be a lot more than 6 box trucks during the day, but I'm not suggesting that they not use it. What I'm asking is, how is it going to all be used?
All right. 2 points. Number one, the applicant should plot out all of the traffic that's going in and out of the property on this back end, since we're changing essentially the traffic pattern. But with that said, as a matter of practical logic, the other 2, I would imagine that the other 2 loading docks that we're not seeing are going to operate as they do today, and that traffic pattern, which I guess is pretty much established, is going to overlap on this new proposal, and you're going to get lanes of traffic that overlap. And if trucks are in the way, things will come to a stop until the truck moves. And if it becomes such a congested part of this back room operation, that the management is going to have to do something to regulate it, either cut down on the number of spaces that there are for the box trucks, because that's really what I see as the interference. The smaller trucks that come in and are going to probably park anywhere they see a place that's convenient to pull over. The tractor trailers are going to pull into the loading dock, so they're in the loading dock and out of the way. So the only thing that's really going to interfere for any type of long-term, other than 2 people coming in at the same time, or going out at the same time, or in and out at the same time. The only kind of long-term interference with the flow are going to be the smaller trucks that are delivering milk or bread or snacks, potato chips, and all those things that might come in from those manufacturers. and having them park in places that might otherwise be in a traveled line of traffic. And it's going to be managed. The only way it's going to be managed by the store, and that's an existing fact of life, because no matter how you could stripe it and assign Wonder Bread here and Frito-Lay here, and if they chose to ignore it, which a lot of drivers aren't going to pay it, they park wherever and they want to run in and do their business and on to the next stop. So if the store doesn't manage the rear of the business, then they're going to have problems operating. But will any of that congestion, because of the nature of it, the only things that I see that might impinge upon your property, again, is the trucks crossing the line and making their turning, and possibly something blocking one of the trucks that use the loading dock that's in the easement.
Mr. Chairman, with all due, I agree, I'm not here to make a statement, but the easement becomes a funny area. And if you're staging in that area, let's just talk about enforcement at some later date to the code officer, and they're loading in that area. If this planning board does not have some representation or some notation on its resolution that can't be an area that you've considered
as a loading,
that
or
you can't stage. You obviously
stage
can
and
cross
load,
it,
right.
but staging can't be. I manage a large brief statement down in Newark Airport where food is delivered to the airport.
No, I understand what you're saying. I don't think that the applicant would have a reasonable objection to allowing, to recognizing the fact that, the easement that's there isn't for loading or for staging. Do you have a different opinion, Counselor?
So I haven't actually reviewed the easement well enough to respond, but I can respond back. It seems we're coming back
Okay.
on some of these topics
So,
anyway.
so let's do that. We'll follow up on it.
Thank you.
But
Few other
what else?
just notes, if I may. This portion of the site is what % impervious?
That portion of the site?
The whole loading, the loading area as access from the street to the building.
Nearly 100.
I raised the question only from history about having an overflow snow area. I understand the concerns of visual on
You got to ask questions,
Glenridge
right?
Avenue.
I'm going to start interrupting you. You have to ask questions.
We would like to see where your snow removal plan is. Previously, snow was dumped into the river, no longer allowed. Where is the snow going to be placed?
What we've identified here, and it's a carryover from prior plans, is we've identified at the nose of this parking island an area with grass pavers that would be an area where snow could be collected and piled.
But if you're going to have a wall there, that's going to interfere with that, right?
Well, but the wall is all the way along the curbs on the south side. So where it's
It'll be piled up against the wall. Is that it?
well, adjacent to the wall.
And some provision in the event that the
Doesn't-
snow does accumulate, that the snow will be removed off-site as we do on our site? I would presume that's the operator or the owner of the property?
That'd be a management question.
Yeah, I think that's something that needs to be addressed in the management agreement that goes along with this, because I don't see that area as being adequate if there's a foot of snow or even a half a foot of snow. That's going to get used up quick, fast.
If I may, there's additional pavement, which is a benefit to the loading, but it's also additional snow. The trailers, is there any thing from the operator of how long each of these 10 trailers might stay? And I'm leading to a second question. There's a reason. How long does it take to, will the trailers be left there with the cab?
I really don't think that the applicant can predict that,
Right. The
because
reason
that's
I
something in the operation of
Yes,
the
Mr. Chairman,
store.
as you may be familiar with, Pathmark, because they were undersized on their storage, left a refrigerated truck there 24/7
I
for
know
any
that's,
number of years.
I know that's where you're going, but even the operator could tell you today that, that's not going to happen. And 2 years from now, or 6 months from now, the situation could change, a freezer could break down, and they decide that the way that, while they get it repaired, they got to park a truck there, a refrigerated truck. You know, and I'm not saying that it's right, I'm not saying that it's permissible, I'm just saying that the applicant can't give you a representation about what the occupant is going to wind
But
up
the
doing
planning board
in the
can
future.
make that a condition of the planning board approval to not have loading overnight.
Well, we
Or
have,
unloading.
what's our ordinance with respect to?
I have that on my properties, and you've put that onto my resolutions. So I'll take that up.
I don't believe we have any restrictions on the time of loading in our
And
regulations.
what you're going for, loading overnight, is not going to deal with a truck, with a trailer parked. Because the trailer's just sitting there, it's not loading.
We'll leave that for another time.
Okay.
Regarding asphalt loading areas, in particular, the friction, the slow movement as compared to a road aisle, is the asphalt able to be reinforced in the easement area and perhaps even your own loading area, but that's your decision. But can that be, is that a specification that is contemplated?
It's not at the moment, but we can evaluate that.
Thank you. Just last, and because it's not referenced on the drawings, and I think it should be. The articulation is shown, I believe 80 some odd feet is the curb cut. The island has been removed. Is there any provision for crosswalk, yellow, just something for the pedestrians to get from, I guess what would be east to west? What is contemplated for this very long apron?
It's not reflected on this plan, but it is shown on the other site plans. Is we have a concrete apron that is essentially provides a pedestrian movement that will be striped as a crosswalk along its entire way.
All right, so as this articulation set of drawings is shown, there's no means to keep that current island there, which in essence acts as, you know, if you're crossing Park Avenue in New York City, you stop in the middle and you can rest or wait while the traffic light is changing again. This is maybe the largest apron I've ever seen. Is there any means?
There shouldn't be that much traffic going in and out of that,
It's
where
about
somebody's going to
pedestrians.
have to walk across and stop. I mean, at
Pedestrians.
certain, you know, granted at certain times, but it's not an intersection. It's the entrance to only trucks that are coming in there to load, and you know, we have discussed this, you know, at prior hearings, about a concern to have some safety, you know, and I think that, I don't think that an island is necessary to establish safe passage.
Well, that whole area is also our access, so you may say that
Question.
we
Well,
have some.
That's the chairman's
he's-
comment.
Well, no, go ahead, let him,
There are some hundreds of cars that come in and out of our property each day. is-
understood, but again, it's not constant traffic.
No.
And it's people coming in and going out of a driveway, and just like any other parking lot, I mean, we've had this discussion with the public parking lots up in Upper Montclair, we've had these discussions with other parking lots that are in town. I mean, you know, cars should have to yield to the pedestrians. You know, pedestrians can't just blindly walk down the sidewalk with, you know, because that's negligent on their part. You know, but I mean, if people are acting reasonable, we're not talking about, you know, the Grand Concourse. You know, and, you know, this is not that kind of traffic. It shouldn't be.
Question, would we recognize the additional 30 feet. Trucks,
Most dangerous.
bear with me please, Counselor, are still going to pull into and underneath our deck because the natural movement is to go as straight as possible rather than on an angle. Would the applicant consider at the bottom of, and I don't know the detail, what would be required, contemplate underneath our deck where you'd come under to stop the trucks from coming under, to contemplate, there's, help me out if anybody knows.
One of
the
those bars?
Well, not a bar, can't be something structural, but something to deter the trucks from, just to consider, to work with us, to
We have,
help
and-
design.
And if I'm not mistaken, we actually may have even put that on testimony previously. Yes, we would
Great.
contemplate headache bars to prevent trucks from encroaching onto your deck.
Great, thank you. On deck and under, and
Both
either or,
levels, yes.
happy to speak.
Are they called, you said heading bars?
Headache bars.
Oh, headache bars. Okay.
There was a name for them.
So I have a question, John. You had mentioned you didn't think that there'd be any change in the amount of traffic going in through the easement from what's there now, but it's anticipated, I thought, that there was going to be retail space that could be restaurants, where now the Lackawanna Plaza storefronts are empty. So all of those stores.
No, the Lackawanna Plaza storefronts.
Yep.
You mean, no, all of those spaces, I believe, were going to front on the Lackawanna parking lot that's
Yes, I know.
on the other side.
But their delivery would be in the back. So wouldn't you get, if they have things.
But isn't it the same deliveries that used to come into the hair salon and the dollar store and the shoemaker and all the ones that used to be along there, Radio Shack? Wouldn't it be like the same? It would be this, we're just replacing
One
one
for the
retail
other.
use. And when I say, what's existing, I meant when it was actually operating, of course.
No, just make sure
now.
I'm clear.
Yeah.
What was there? Was a laundry, like along
There was
the
there was a
Lackawanna Plaza
laundromat.
front.
There was
That were
there was like
empty
a
for a
dollar
long
store.
time.
There was the hair care place.
Electronic?
There was Radio Shack.
Yeah, yeah.
There was the shoemaker.
So all their
there was an
deliveries
eyeglass
came
place.
through that easement
Yeah.
that he's talking, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. There,
Hello, Priscilla Eshelman, 50 Label Street, Montclair. I'd like to know if you're familiar with the walk score for this location.
with the what?
Walk score. It's both the website, it's also a concept. It's a very big deal in real estate. When you're house hunting, you can look for properties, you can search on walk scores, which is what I did, which is how I got to Montclair. Actually, the Lackawanna Plaza walk score is 95 out of 100.
Is this leading to a
And
question?
yes, it is. Do you know what a 95 translates to?
No.
Walker's paradise, quote unquote. So I would like to know, looking at your plan as a walker, say somebody is 75 years old with a cart full of groceries, they live at Claremont and Grove, they live there because it's a walker's paradise, what is the safest way for that person to get home?
To be clear, to answer a slightly different question, I'll get to your question in a moment. We're only enhancing pedestrian access into the site. The grocery store is not fundamentally a different location than where the grocery store was previously. So the distance from any route, any access to the site, to the front of the grocery store is going to be the same. We've actually enhanced the pedestrian environment by reactivating the stairs along Grove Street and now adding a pedestrian ramp where there was none, to include even those who are handicap accessible or maybe carrying with carts to get to that Grove Street driveway.
I would argue that that wasn't safe then. I didn't live here during
but
the
it's
Pathmark
this
era.
isn't the point where you argue about those things.
No, I
you
have
ask
questions
you ask
about it.
questions
Yeah.
and then you keep your argument for
Okay.
later.
My question would be back to the historic preservation architect's plan, which had entrances on two sides. Seemed like it would cut down on walking, especially for elderly people in the neighborhood. Another question I have is, say I have visitors in town, we go to Seymour Street, they look at some art, we do some shopping on Bloomfield. Can you tell me the route to this historic site that would be the most like paradise?
Didn't we have
Would
this
it be
question
through the parking lot?
last time?
There are routes through the parking lot if you so chose. There's pedestrian opportunities around the entire block in the public right-of-way. So my suggestion, if those who feel safe enough to travel through the parking lot, maybe a shorter distance. For those who want to be in a protected environment on the sidewalk adjacent to the road, have that opportunity as well.
And to clarify, Kevin, your testimony a moment ago that any walkability that existed before is not changing. Matter of fact, it's actually improving. So to the extent that it's been characterized as a walker's paradise, by logic, it remains actually an improved walker's paradise.
It has been closed several years. I'm not sure what time period they look at when they said it was a walker's paradise. How many pedestrians walk on Glenridge Avenue, say between 9 a.m. and noon?
I don't know.
How many pedestrians walk on Grove Street between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., Monday through Friday?
I don't know.
Are there more pedestrians on Saturday than there are during the week?
There may be. I haven't evaluated.
I'm not sure if Mr. Webb has testified to any pedestrian counts.
I don't understand how there's a plan that doesn't include pedestrian traffic for the business model. if
Well,
nothing else.
again, that's something, that's not a question. That's a statement, it's a argument. It's not directed at anything that he's testified to this evening.
I see.
Argument for an alternative plan.
So it's something that you need to bring up at another phase
Thank you, I
of the
will.
proceeding.
I'll make this quick. My name's Brittany DeMayo. I live on 16 Seymour Street. Don't really have a question because she asked most of the questions.
Then this isn't the time for you to speak. This is questions of this witness about what he testified to this evening.
Even if it's something that's positive about this?
Sorry, it's just, it has to be fair. We have to take the good with the bad. We have to take the good with the bad. And, in fairness to all the other people who I don't let ask questions, I can't allow you to,
Okay, can I? All right, well, let me.
No password.
Just try to frame it.
I'm going to
Try to frame it as a
rearrange
question.
into a question.
There you go.
Questions, not statements or comments.
As a resident within Montclair, how do you feel, the last woman was asking about the pedestrian walkways, so how do you feel that this is going to increase the residents' ability to, I'm not good on the spot. More so, just how is this going to improve the living experience for residents that are so close? Walking distance, to have a walking supermarket and, all of this. And how is this going to improve, the Lackawanna area?
Yeah, well, obviously, as I said before, so we're not taking any pedestrian movements away, and our hope is to fill the shopping center with destination retail and grocery stores and other related things that people will want to go to by whatever means, walking, biking, perhaps scootering, who knows. As I'd mentioned before, so we're actually creating an enhanced pedestrian environment. None of the existing pedestrian opportunities that are there today are going to be removed. We're adding reactivating the stairs along Grove Street. We're adding now a ramp along Grove Street that connects to the existing Grove Street right-of-way. One thing I did not mention previously, but has been part of testimony previously, is that there's actually now, for lack of a better term, like an alleyway between the inline retail and the front of the grocery store that will connect opportunities even from Lackawanna Plaza to not have to walk around the block to get to the front of the grocery store, but to basically walk, due east to be able to go right to the grocery store from Lackawanna Plaza. So again, I think we have a significantly enhanced pedestrian environment and hopefully a full shopping center.
And you had mentioned that there's going to be an area, so if people want to take an Uber, for people that don't have, a car, or, if it's raining, there's going to be a whole area there.
There is an area that's identified in front of the store. It's 60 feet long. That would be a taxi rideshare area.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then you have all this. Broad train tracks, so pretty.
Hi, James Cotter, 21 Clover Hill Place. I don't know if we got clarity on a question I asked, I think 2 meetings ago. It relates to the new entrance on Grove Street. Have you gotten approval from the county on that new point of egress from Grove Street?
The application's still under review by the county planning board.
Okay, so it's the county planning board. When do we anticipate that coming to fruition?
I don't know for certain. I hope it's sooner than later. They've had it a while.
Is this plan dependent upon getting approval from the county, this particular circulation plan?
My presumption is that the planning board, if they do approve it, would include a resolution, and within the resolution, a condition that we get all outside agency permits, of which the county planning board would be one.
And
is it
obviously, if they don't get approved, then they can't put the curb cut there. So, you know, that changes the plan.
Is it chicken or egg? Do you have to get county approval first, or do you get your approval first for the county?
It's by law. We're not allowed to hold up anyone's site plan for the outside agency approvals. We just had a big case on this. And, oh yeah, thank you.
Gotcha.
So basically, we have to hear the case and grant it. If it turns out later on that they can't do something, whether it was wetlands or the county didn't let them use the right-of-way, they would have to modify their plans and come back in for an amendment.
Okay. And just for clarification, this new point of egress would change pedestrian access to the site, correct?
The opportunity to walk along that area is the same. You would have to cross the driveway where there is none today. Again, that would be the change, but pedestrian crossing opportunity is still there.
Correct. But just to be clear, this is not the same walking experience as it had been before, meaning this new point of egress has the potential to create hazard for pedestrians.
For that 40 feet where the driveway crosses, yes, that is a difference.
Thank you.
Kathleen Bennett, 10 Glenwood Road. We're talking about easements and access. What is happening with the easement for the pedestrian tunnel? Have you gotten any clarification whether that's public access in perpetuity, or is that something that can be closed off for only access for the apartment building?
Well, that was addressed at the prior hearing, but...
Yes, but you didn't have an answer then? Do you have an answer now?
Oh, no. I mean, the answer is that there is a recorded map which indicates easement that to the grantee, which is our predecessor in title, and it doesn't provide for, it's exclusively to our predecessor in title, which means it's exclusively to us, which means we control it.
The new owner controls it?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have a number on that easement?
Well, there's a filed map number. It was submitted with the application, and it is filed map number 3544, filed November 15th, 1983.
Thank you.
Yeah. You should have it. It's on the website. Isn't that big binder?
I'm Laura Wilson from Glen Ridge, New Jersey, on Ridgewood Avenue. And my question is, are you losing parking spots, or are they staying the same?
Where? I'm sorry, could you clarify?
Along Bloomfield Avenue.
There's a key to it.
From the existing parking lot to what's today, we actually are increasing the number.
By how many?
I don't recall off the top of my head the number that's there today. We're proposing 197. I would deem a significant increase.
Are you changing the setback of the stores? Are the storefronts being pushed back? Because I don't understand how you're getting more parking spaces in that area of the parking lot.
The stores that are in front of the grocery store today, if you were to essentially peel back the mall, will be removed to expose. So the front of the grocery store will remain, but the distance between the front of the grocery store and where the existing storefronts, or I guess rears of those Bloomfield-facing stores, will be filled with parking.
So there won't be those storefronts then? It's just
Correct.
a grocery store there now?
Correct.
So that's why you're giving up all the parking on the other side, right? There's no parking on the other side for...
You have to speak up, I can't hear you.
There's no parking on the other side of Grove Street for the public.
Correct.
Is that right? It's just for the tenants of the building.
Right.
I just want to make sure there's enough parking, because right
Correct.
now,
Tenants,
there's
tenants of the
extensive
building
parking.
and also the employees of the grocery store will park on the other side of the street. The public will park in the expanded lot in front of the grocery store. That's the proposal.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions from the public?
I actually just had one follow-up question, just to clarify. There was some discussion a few moments ago about the loading dock where the stores were, and just to clarify, I think this point was made by members of the board, but just, Mr. Webb, just to clarify, the amount of loading that typically took place in the spaces, not the grocery store loading, but the other loading, that's going to be decreased because of the elimination of the stores which were formerly there?
In theory, correct, yes. I mean, obviously, we don't know the tenants of any of those or the loading needs or habits, but by extrapolation, we would assume because there's less retail space, there's less loading activity at those existing docks.
All right. Any other questions from the board? Follow up to that? All right. We're going to take a 5-minute break before your next witness. Otherwise, we probably won't be able to do it for another hour and a half.
Thank you.
We're up and running.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your
For
full
the
name.
record, my name is Dan Cesario, last name is D-I-S-A-R-I-O.
If you could do that into the microphone, that would be helpful, either the handheld or the lectern.
Absolutely. So for the record, my name is Dan Cesario, last name is D-I-S-A-R-I-O, with
And,
Langen Engineering.
You're, okay, could you provide us, is the board familiar with this expert?
They
Then
are not.
If not, provide me with 3 boards that you've appeared before recently as a traffic expert, and please do not include Montclair.
South Brunswick. South Brunswick, Edison, Quinton Township.
Chairman, we accept his credentials?
I think that's good enough.
Sure, and as in the field of parking as well as traffic, if that's acceptable to the board, Mr. Chairman.
How long have you been a traffic expert, testifying before boards?
Testifying before boards, that would be about 22 years.
All right.
I know, I don't look that old. That was a joke, you can laugh.
Yeah, nobody commented either. It's a tough crowd here. Tough crowd. Yeah, it's going to be a lot older after tonight.
I can't say I'll lose my hair after tonight because it's gone already.
Beat us to it already.
Mr. Desario, you're familiar with the application that's the subject of tonight's hearing?
Yes, I am.
And you're familiar with the subject, as to the subject of parking, the requirements of the Township Code with respect to this application?
Yes.
And you have experience in the field of shared parking analysis?
Yes.
Yes. And with all that being said, can you give the board the benefit of the analysis that was prepared by Langen Engineering and any conclusions associated with how this applicant can meet the parking demands for the project and in the context particularly of the variance being sought by the applicant?
Certainly, and again, for the record, our firm prepared a parking study management plan report, last revised September 14th, 2018.
We should mark that into the record.
Okay.
Certainly. I don't know what exhibit we're up to.
A37.
Thank you. And that report will form the basis of the testimony that I will respectfully submit to you this evening as it relates to the parking and the management plan that the project team has developed with respect to the application that's before you this evening. Before I start in terms of detail, I think the goal that the project team had as it relates to parking, and certainly I think the township would share in this goal, is that we really wanted to arrive at a parking supply that was right-sized So a supply that wasn't too many spaces, and certainly a supply that wasn't enough spaces, and because we clearly understand the sensitivity to parking as it relates to the lack thereof of adequate parking in some areas of the township. And an overarching, I think, theme is that this applicant did not want parking demand from this project to spill over beyond the confines of the site itself, to have an adverse impact beyond the site confines. I think within an overall context, we're all familiar with the fact that trends are changing as they relate to how people actually transport themselves. The trend in terms of vehicle ownership is starting to trend downward as people avail themselves of car sharing services like Uber and Lyft. There's less of a reliance on owning a vehicle in order to be able to be mobile than, say, 5 or 10 years ago. And certainly that translates oftentimes to less of a demand for actual parking spaces than would have otherwise have existed previously before those services were available. Somebody told me, and please don't quote me, but it's on the order of this. Somebody had told me that about 8 to 9 parking spaces exist for every vehicle that's on the road in our country. So if you step back and you think about that for a second, 8 or 9 parking spaces exist for every car that everyone owns in this room. And if you start really thinking about that in your daily life, you might have a couple parking spaces at your residence. You might have a parking space where you work. Probably have a parking space where you're often shop. And there's other parking spaces that you can think about that you avail yourselves of in your daily living. So this country has a lot of parking. One would argue we probably have too much parking. So those were some of the guiding principles that we inherently took in as we looked at the adequacy of the supply that's proposed for this project. So the record is clear. What we are seeking is a variance for the number of parking spaces. Your ordinance requirement is based on identifying the required parking for each of the individual land uses. So this project has medical office, retail, which includes grocery as well as restaurant space, and residential. So your ordinance says, let's see what the parking requirements are for those individual land uses, and let's add them up to come to a total parking requirement. In doing that, excluding the TD Bank, which everyone knows there's shared access with TD Bank, but as it relates to parking supply, we're not reliant on their parking supply at all. Your ordinance requirement for this project, as currently contemplated, would be a total of 817 parking spaces. Whereas we are proposing a total parking supply of 457 parking spaces. Now those 457 parking spaces consist of 197 parking spaces in the main parking field in front of all the retail on the west parcel, 30 parking spaces in the Lackawanna Plaza parking lot, 130 spaces underneath the proposed residential building, and 100 spaces on the eastern parcel where the residential building is. That would be surface parking outside of the proposed residential building. So the total supply is 457. Your total requirement is 817, excluding TD Bank, for a variance or a shortfall that we're seeking relief from of 360 parking spaces. And by the numbers, that's how your ordinance has to be applied. Now, it's my understanding that this board, as well as this municipality, is familiar with the concept of shared parking and has used shared parking as part of approvals for other developments. And I think that's very forward thinking. because it helps to get to what an appropriate parking supply is when you have a mix of uses like this proposed project contemplates. The simplest example of shared parking concept is you can have one parking space that would serve somebody that lives in a building that would use that one parking space. And they get in their car and they leave to go to work for the day. While that parking space is now vacant during the day, you could have someone that would work in a building that could use that parking space. So while they're at work from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, they use that parking space. And when they're done with work, they leave. That parking space is then available for the resident, who then would come home in the evening and then park in that same parking space. That, in very simple terms, is what a shared parking concept is, where you can have parking that is shared by different users at different times. Now, your master plan identifies this area, and in particular this site, as being part of the transit core area. For good reason, because of the availability of mass transit, in particular the Bay Street, New Jersey Transit Station, which essentially is within walking distance of this site. Now that's important because residents of the proposed building, a lot of them would be attracted to living there because there is train service to New York City that is within walking distance of where they would live. Again, reducing the reliance of them owning a vehicle if they so chose not to own a vehicle, but still be able to be mobile and get to a destination in terms of a workplace like New York City, like Newark, like other places along that rail line. What is recognized in our industry for shared parking analyses is a publication that is put out by the International Council of Shopping Centers, as well as the Urban Land Institute. That publication is Shared Parking, that's what it's entitled, and it's in its second edition. And that's what we've used to come up with a shared parking evaluation / analysis to evaluate the adequacy of the proposed parking supply to serve the development that is before you as part of this application. Now there's a few steps in that shared parking analysis, and I think it would be helpful to take you through those steps to understand the basis of each of the steps so that you can have a fuller understanding of how we arrive under a shared parking model, the conclusions we've reached with respect to the adequacy of the supply that's proposed. Mr. Chairman, you look like you can't wait to hear what I'm about to say. My wife calls me boring, but I really like this stuff, so I don't want to bore you, but I think it's necessary just to take you through that detail.
Well, keep in mind, as you recognized earlier, that we are familiar with shared parking. We have applied it in the past. I think we have a basic understanding. So if there are twists or turns that you want to tell us about, we'd certainly be interested in hearing them, but otherwise we've probably heard it at least 6 or 7 or 8 times. So without exaggeration.
I believe it. So with that, then I'll speed up my presentation.
You also have a very soothing voice that's allowing us all to sleep.
I was responsible for rocking the kids to sleep at night when they woke up in the middle of the night, so yes, I can understand that. So step 1 is basically establishing the base parking supply ratios for the individual land uses. And one of the things that I did neglect to tell you is that our analysis was based on really a peak season of December because of the amount of retail that's proposed as part of this project. Retail generally has highest parking demands in December, so that's the basis of our shared parking analysis. So with respect to the base parking ratios, I'll just quickly go through them.
December.
So based on, again, shared parking analysis publication,
Excuse me, is there a chart in here that,
there is, if you want to turn
Yeah.
to the back of this study, it's
Okay.
table number 2.
thank you.
And for the public's benefit, I'll just quickly go through them. And one of the things as part of a shared parking analysis, we break down both employee parking demands as well as non-employee parking demands. For the amount of retail that's proposed, ULI classifies that as community shopping center, less than 400,000 square feet, which certainly we would be appropriately classified as. So during a weekday for community shopping center, the patron parking supply ratio that would be recommended by ULI would be 2.9 spaces per 1,000 square feet. For retail employees, that would be 0.70 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Similarly, for weekend peak demand, 3.2 for patrons and 0.8 for employees. So slightly higher in both instances on the weekend. For a family restaurant, certainly like the existing restaurant, patrons would be 9 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Employees would be 1.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So a restaurant's got a little more in terms of employee demand on a per square footage basis, which you would expect. For the weekend, restaurant patrons 12.75 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and employees would be 2.25 spaces per 1,000 square feet. For the residential, visitors, so guests of people living there, would be 0.15 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and the actual residents parking supply ratio would be 1.5 per 1,000 square feet. Identical ratios for Saturday. And then medical dental office for weekday, for the patients, so to speak, 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and employees would be 1.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and that would be the same on a weekend, particularly Saturday.
Excuse me, what does that asterisk pertain to on the third line?
That's a typo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it has absolutely no value whatsoever. I
What
did
do you-
notice that before.
What do you mean by shared spaces?
Excuse me?
And right before the asterisk, it says shared spaces? What are those?
That should just read residential rental,
Okay.
not shared spaces asterisk. That's a typo. So those are the baseline parking supply ratios as set forth by ULI for the different components that are comprised of this project. Step 2 is to account for non-personal vehicle mode of transportation. We've made some assumptions as part of our model. We've assumed that 10% of the medical office employees would use some other mode to come to the site other than driving their own car, whether it's mass transit, walking, or Uber or Lyft. We've assumed 25% of the retail employees would also not drive their own car. And I can harken back to when my kids were teenagers and didn't have licenses. Mom and me drove them to and from their jobs.
I'm sorry, but those assumptions are based on what?
They're based on the availability of mass transit in the area.
But they're your own personal assumptions. There's nothing that backs them up except that's what you feel is.
That is correct, yes. I'm sure we could pull some census data to explore the mode that people use to come to work in this area, and it wouldn't be 100% use their car. So we felt these were reasonable, but certainly we can provide more detail if
Yeah,
you so
I'd be
choose.
interested in how you arrived at your assumptions, since they're really key you're reducing the amount of parking that you think we need. Yeah.
They are, and I think you'll hear from your parking consultant at some point in this process, and it's been vetted with your parking consultant as well.
And Dan, I'm sorry, I was just going to, Dan, to jump in, those assumptions that you were speaking of a moment ago, those are in some way related to the Parking Matters methodology that you were talking about before, and also this has been discussed, I think you may have just said that, has actually been discussed with the township's parking consultant in advance of submitting this report and testifying today, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the necessary spaces, are we talking about the entire property, or just the shopping center, just the shopping store? Because let's not forget, we do have a business there that's already operating with staff and the need for parking for their patrons as well.
The answer is both. We're looking at the overall site as well as with a particular focus on the retail parking, which is the main parking field on the west parcel. So it's both. We've assumed 20% of the retail patrons would come to the site by other means other than driving themselves in their own car. And we've assumed that 30% of the residents that live in the residential building would also not rely on a car to travel to and from the site. That is based on New Jersey Transit data for residential developments that have rail service available to them. So that was the mode assumptions that we arrived at. And then step 3 is actually applying the shared parking model for the various components. Now, the way the shared parking model works is you calculate the actual demand with the assumptions that I took you through for each land use by time of day. So you look at a typical day, and over the course of a typical day, parking demand is going to fluctuate by each land use. Residential, the demand is going to be high in the evening, lower during the day when people are out working. The retail, the demand will be high actually during the middle of the day, particularly because of grocery store. And then it'll taper off as you get into the later hours of the evening. So you do that for each land use, and you identify the hour based on that shared parking model that produces the highest required parking. And now, Kevin, you could put that.
So, sir, to expedite this a little bit, you've reviewed these various uses, you've reviewed the various times of day, you've come up with a shared parking model. Are you in complete agreement with the town's consultant in your plan and presentation here?
We differ a little bit in the numbers, but for all intents and purposes, we are consistent, yes.
And where do you differ?
Your consultant's estimation applying the shared parking model of the actual required parking supply is slightly higher than ours. And I will take you through what ours is and show you what that is. And essentially, weekday, 1 p.m., is the highest required parking supply based on the shared parking model.
I remember seeing some back and forth a long time ago. I think he was at like 311 or 323, if my memory is correct, and you're at 29. Is that right?
Are you? I'm not.
4,000?
So you're talking about the parking supply ratios now?
Yes. I'm just trying to get an idea for how much of a variance you are with our consultant's findings.
Does our consultant have a side-by-side table?
Well, that's what that was.
Yeah.
Our consultant's here.
He's
Yeah.
here,
Right.
yeah.
So what I would suggest is let me finish mine because I'm almost done. And then if the board would like to ask me questions or not, then you can have your consultant come up and present his findings, and then we can compare the two, if that's okay. So based on our analysis, weekday 1 p.m. Again, it's based on December because that's when retail parking demand is its highest. Based on our shared parking analysis, a total required parking supply of 434 parking spaces would be required. That consists of patrons parking demand of 244. So that would be the retail patrons. That would be people coming to the medical office building. Employee parking demand would be 72. And residents and their guests would amount to 118. So the combination of the east parcel, which has a supply of 230 parking spaces, the applicant is proposing that all of the employees of the retail and the medical office building park at the east parcel. So all employees, whether you're in the medical office building or any of the retailers, all of those employees would park at the east parcel. So between the employee parking demand of 72 and the residents and their guest parking demand of 118, that would be a total parking supply requirement of 190 versus 230 parking spaces that are proposed at the east parcel. Again, 130 under the residential building and 100 surface. The retail patrons parking demand for all the retail, as well as the medical office patients, would be 244. That gives you a total required parking supply of 434. The 244 of retail patrons and medical office patients, if you will, would be accommodated by 227 parking spaces on the west parcel. So on the west parcel, we have 197 in front of all the retail, and we have 30 in the Lackawanna Plaza parking lot. It's 227. We're anticipating a total parking supply requirement of 244 based on the shared parking analysis. There is a deficit of 17 spaces from the west parcel supply versus the projected demand, both retail and patients of the medical office. The applicant is proposing, as part of an overall parking management plan for the site, to provide what's identified as attendant assisted parking. That attendant assisted parking will allow for the west parcel, and in particular the Lackawanna Plaza parking lot, to have an attendant that will assist people to park. So the Lackawanna Plaza lot, which is 30 spaces, with this attendant assistant management, can accommodate more vehicles.
You mean valet parking?
It's really attendant assistant in terms of if you drive, and I'll tell you the difference.
Yeah, so actually on this, just without having torturing Dan with us, we actually have one more witness, Kristen Sokich from Pro Park America, who's familiar with the township and has operated parking, and I believe he's actually testified in front of this board on a number of occasions about attendant assist. We're going to bring him up after this to explain that operation, and I think he can answer that question as far as the difference.
Okay. Just one other question. And where would those cars be parked? Would they be parked over on the east parcel?
No, they would be parked on the west parcel, and in particular in the Lackawanna lot, Place lot.
So
Although there's probably some more detail to that that actually Kristen can speak to when he comes up. 'Cause it may be
because
that,
the plans show regular parking spaces there.
yeah, again, we'll.
Wouldn't you have to amend the parking plan to show stacked parking? You know, queued parking, valet parking, to do what you're saying?
So again, we can go over how specifically the Lackawanna lot, and to the extent it's required to go outside of that, how that attendant assist would work in the context.
But certainly we can provide that plan, yes.
Is that only for that's only for the Lackawanna Plaza? That's the only part of the west block that's going to be attendant assisted? The people who come to the supermarket and other, they're not going to have that attendant assistance, right?
That's correct.
Except for, how about the Pig and Prince? Is that for the Pig and Prince and the medical office building?
So again, I don't want to testify for Mr. Sokich,
Okay.
but technically, if you come into the Lackawanna parking lot and want to utilize attendant assist where the attendant assist is being operated, there's no restriction that says you must only be utilizing the medical office space. Theoretically, a Pig and Prince visitor could utilize that attendant assist.
Okay.
But it's not, to answer your question, there's not going to be attendant assist in front of the proposed supermarket for supermarket patrons. It would really only be on the Lackawanna lot.
Can you just ask a question? When you have a medical office building, does that require more handicap parking?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
When you have a
please?
medical office building, does it require more handicap parking spots?
I don't believe it does. It's only a function of the number of parking spaces that are proposed.
It's nothing to do with the type being a medical where you might have people who are, have handicap stickers, no? Okay.
I don't believe so, no.
The one thing that I don't quite understand with your analysis so far is for the residential east parcel, your calculations for usage during the day for the residents, what is your projection or your assumptions about what happens to the residents' cars? How many remain, how many leave, that sort of thing. How many are actually used by residents?
So, based on the shared parking analysis, at 1 o'clock on a weekday, which is the highest parking demand overall for the site, 30% of the residents would not be there. So we've assumed that 70% of the residents, in terms of their parked vehicles, would be there.
And what is that assumption based on again?
That is based on ULI, shared parking for residential parking demand at 1 o'clock on a weekday. It's 70% of the maximum parking demand for residential, which occurs into the late hours in the evening.
The residential parking is under the building.
Well, it's
So-
under the building and outside.
Correct.
Yes, but here's my question. Is the parking under the building available for sharing by everybody else?
My understanding is that the medical office employees will have access to the under the building parking on the east parcel underneath the residential building.
Are you saying that only employees have access to under the building, and it's only clarify that for me, please. Who has access to the under the building parking?
Residents of the building and employees of the medical office building.
And the supermarket.
Yeah, you said
It's all employees.
All
all
employees.
And
Of
what what is it that enforces that the employee is going to park their car under the building as opposed to find it more easily to park right outside in the parking lot in front of the supermarket? What enforces the use of that?
Yeah, yeah. It's obviously management operation, and it's it has to be policed and securitized through that. And there's obviously it can be tracked via the fobs we were talking about before.
Pardon?
There was a talking about how the access to the tunnel would work. This again relates back to the pedestrian tunnel. The employees park on the east lot, cross back through the tunnel into the west lot.
Yes, but this is a trust system that this is what's going to happen. There's no monitoring. There's no.
Well, there's security that monitors this.
They would have to take an active look at it to see exactly what the employees are doing. It's not what they've described so far in all of the evidence is not a established system of monitoring where the employees go. If they wanted to find out, they could.
Right,
So if it became a problem, if it became a problem, it's something that they could track down, and they could by monitoring the access and also by physical observation during key hours when people are coming and going from work. The only way that a control could be imposed by the landlord would have to be a condition of whatever the mode of rental or occupation of the business is that if you want your business here, your employees have to park there. Which is not uncommon. Supermarkets do it all the time. But yeah, there's room for abuse.
Well, the number of parking spaces under the building was 130, is that it?
Yes.
Yes.
And you've got 85 employees, right? And you want 70% of those cars to be there, or 30% of the cars in the underground are going to be gone? I'm trying to figure the math. It looks very complex.
30% on the site will be gone. So you could say 30% of the outside and 30% of the inside is going to be gone. So what's going to happen is that if you believe their numbers, then some people are going to be able to park under the building, and some people are going to park outside of the building. And all of them will walk through the tunnel to get to wherever they have to be, their place of business, their employer.
I would be surprised if this relatively sophisticated expectation is actually the reality of how the program will work. And I don't know where the accountability is for it.
And I can understand your skepticism, but I will respectfully submit to you that it's in the interest of every single retailer that's going to take space there to ensure that the maximum amount of parking is available to the customer, not to their employee. So to an extent, it's self-serving by the individual retailers to ensure that if you want to work here, you're parking on the east parcel, not in front of the store. And retailers are very motivated to ensure that your shopping experience is as pleasurable as possible. And I can tell you, just practically speaking, and reasonably thinking this through, the retailers are going to be very motivated to make sure their employees do not park on the west parcel.
Is the residential building to be condo or rental?
My understanding, it's rental.
And will there be a limitation on per car per unit? How's that going to work?
I think there has to be. How many units? 200 and some odd units.
Are you waiting on your client?
The applicant, yes.
Sorry, I'm just clarifying. So, yeah, the number of cars will be controlled by the lease, and it's anticipated that potentially one car per lease. Although there's an expectation that you may have lease occupants who aren't going to even have a car. So,
So now I have a kind of logical question. I think Mr. Rubacki raised this some time ago. If we've got a parking shortfall, we know we do, and we're asking for a major variance, and we're trying to make it work with shared parking, why did we raise the square footage of the supermarket and retail area like 10%? I think that's what the calculation was. Well, in other words, why are we making more space so that we have a bigger variance when parking is an issue? This new plan, I think, went up in square footage for the supermarket from the last.
Bruce Stevie will be back to testify at the, I believe, the next hearing, but I don't want to, at the risk of speaking for him, I believe he testified that the reason that the size of the supermarket increased from between the two hearings had to do with the desire to save the number of stanchions that existed.
Yeah, no, I remember.
So it pulled forward.
But we, you know, you've raised the space size, and now we've got a bigger parking variance. So, you know, could that be mitigated?
I mean, respectfully, I mean, again, there's a number of options for the site which, you know, impact this. Candidly, the presence of the stanchions in the parking field actually decreased the number of available parking spaces as well. So there's been give and take, I think, you know, during this process in terms of trying to find the right balance between the desire to maintain the feel of the site in terms of its historic legacy and comparably trying to find a solution for the amount of parking. And I don't want to speak for Mr.
Well, hold
Cesario,
on.
but sure.
We had supermarket experts testify. They thought a smaller supermarket should be in this site, and therefore there would be a much less parking. What's the reaction to that?
Well, actually, I should probably ask Mr. Cesario this question. Is there any difference between the parking requirement for a supermarket versus another retail space that would occupy in that same building?
No.
No. Yeah. I think that's the
But just so it's clear, and forgive me if it's not, our shared parking analysis and evaluation has concluded that overall, the parking supply is enough. Where there is a shortfall, so to speak, is on the western parcel during a weekday at 1 o'clock in December. And to address that, and it's a 17-space deficit, to address that, the applicant is proposing an attendant-assisted parking management operation to increase the supply on that side. If that is not palatable to the board, or if it's not practical, although we feel it is, and you will hear from another expert at some point, hopefully tonight, there's the ability to take additional vehicles over to the east parking lot, where we have a 40-space surplus based on the shared parking analysis. So there will be times when the retail in December is generating its peak parking demand, and the decision by management may be we need to take more vehicles over to the east parking lot, and there's a surplus there that can accommodate that. At other times of the year, there will be enough parking both on the east parcel and west parcel to accommodate the demand under the shared parking model. So our position is the parking supply is more than enough to accommodate demand. During a peak month like December, on the west side, there is a deficit as it relates to the supply versus the demand, which the applicant is going to mitigate with this parking management plan as a practical matter.
I was doing the math rather slowly, and I was looking at the fact that you have 85, you say, employee parking spaces to fill, and that they're to be filled on the east side. The only employees have access to parking on the east side. You've only got 40 parking spaces underground that you're counting on those employees using. Otherwise, they're going to be parking on the lot. It seems to me that you're going to need assisted parking on both the east and the west parcel.
So, let me just be clear again, and forgive me. I don't think I have been clear. On the east parcel, there's 130 parking spaces under the building,
Right.
and there's 100 spaces outside the building,
Right.
for a total supply of 230 parking spaces. December, on a weekday at 1 o'clock, the employee parking demand for all the retail and the medical office building is 72. The residential parking demand will be 118, for a total employee and resident parking demand of 190 spaces versus the 230 spaces, the 130 under the residential building and the 100 outside the residential building. So there are 40 more parking spaces on the east parcel than what the actual demand will be.
I guess my problem is I don't want to spend too much time arguing the point, but it seems to me that your plan really depends on employees filling up the underground parking spaces before they decide to park outside. Otherwise, they'll all be parked outside and the underground will be empty. I'm just saying that it's a management issue that is more, depends on a lot more coordination as to where the employees park than only regulation would solve. It seems to me that you're going to need assisted parking on both lots. That's all I'm looking at.
And at times, that may be the case, and we agree.
Otherwise, you're going to have employees who decide to park up on the outside, and all the parking spaces are underground, and people can't use them. So they're taken, and the other people who come to park can't park.
We completely agree that at times there may need to be some parking management on the east parcel as well as the west parcel. Totally agree.
I have a question about this ULI. Is that the organ?
The Urban Land Institute.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So those numbers, the formula that they use, that you're basing this upon, is it regionalized? Are parking habits different in Montclair, New Jersey, as maybe in Boulder, Colorado? Or is it a blanket formula that they use?
It's a national standard that is empirically based. So data that comprises their database, if you will, was collected across the country. So it's not region specific, it's a national standard, if you will.
So are we, do we think that the majority of the people that are the residents in the east side, in the new building, are going to drive to their places of business? They're going to take their cars out of the parking lots during the day? 30%?
30%, yes.
Okay. And what about so the other people perhaps are walking to the train or walking to the bus to get to their place of business?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the same across, it's hard to understand that. The
Yeah, just
habits are the same in different parts.
Also by income level. I mean, I gather this is kind of an upscale apartment building, wouldn't it? I mean, I would think that two people in a one-bedroom apartment in Montclair may have 2 cars, and I certainly don't think they will not have any cars. It's just the nature of how people live these days. I know young people want to use Lyft and Uber, but do you have data on how many people in Montclair are using Lyft and Uber? I mean, you're making the assumption they are, but what's the hard data?
I do not. However, I can tell you, and I can envision, that you could have empty nesters that moved out of a single-family home into a rental apartment because they wanted to get rid of one car or maybe both cars that they owned previously, because they can walk to the grocery store, they can walk to retail, and they can walk to a train station or a bus line. I can envision young professionals that may live together, roommates, that don't own cars because they are
I think if you took a
completely-
survey of people in this room, there's probably nobody who doesn't own a car.
I agree with you. I don't disagree. But given this type of residential project, it will attract empty nesters that may choose not to own cars, It will attract young professionals that may choose not to own cars. And all that I'm respectfully submitting to you is that everyone that lives in that residential building is not going to own a car, and everyone that lives in that residential building is not going to own 2 cars. Some will not own any cars, and some will only own 1 car.
All I'm saying is you need some data to support that assumption, you know.
The New Jersey Transit has put out data that says for residential development that is near a train station, the parking demand can be reduced by 30%. That's what we've done in our shared parking analysis. In addition, 1 o'clock on a weekday, the residential parking demand is typically 30% less than the peak demand. That's what we've accounted for in the shared parking analysis. Because about 30% of the people that live in that building will take their cars and leave for the day. So we're assuming 70% are staying back and leaving their cars at the residential building on the east parcel. If more people were to drive to work, you'd have even more parking available than what we've accounted for in our study. If you think more people will own cars and live in that building, I would respectfully submit to you that it's probably likely that more than 30% of those people are going to be driving somewhere during the day, presumably to go to work. We've only accounted for a 30% assumption. So 70% of the vehicles associated at that residential building are staying there. And it could be a lot less than that.
And Dan, just to clarify, you in terms of the basis for the assumptions, I think you said this before, but this is in addition to the New Jersey Transit the data that you mentioned that was relied upon. This is also based on ULI's shared parking data and assumptions that it promulgates.
Yes.
And just to go back actually a moment, with respect to employees parking on the east lot underground versus in the surface lot above ground, that's something that could also be operationally controlled potentially by the FOBs, which would be required to access the underground. In other words, not all employees would necessarily have the FOB to park underground?
Yes.
Yeah.
How would those employees then get to the western lot? They're not going to utilize the tunnel, as we've heard?
Yeah, so you'd have a fob that maybe lets you in the tunnel, but it doesn't let you park your car.
And that's shown on the plans of having that level of detail?
It could be.
Did you say that would let you in the tunnel but not let you park the car?
Yeah, because I didn't see that on the plans.
Yeah, I don't necessarily get how that works either, because how are you determining what 30% is vacating their spaces? It may not always be the same 30%. These are averages, you know, and I would imagine that the spots that are vacating, are probably going to be randomly distributed throughout the parking stock, you know. But in any case, and also it's my experience, having worked in a building for the past 5 years that has some parking under the building and some parking outside of the building, that everybody wants to be under the building year-round because it's cooler in the summer, it doesn't get rained on, and you don't get snowed on. You know, so that's the prime space where you want to be. You park outside when all those other spaces are filled up. But anyway, do you have more testimony about what the bottom line is on this? In terms of your conclusions as to the parking. I mean, we understand that this is based on averages and such, but and we've kind of sidetracked you with asking other questions. So I don't know where you are right now in your presentation.
As it relates to parking, I'm pretty much concluded with my direct, but I will sum it up just to make it clear. We've identified a parking requirement based on the shared parking analysis of 434 spaces. The overall project proposes 457 spaces. So we have enough parking to accommodate the demand. The applicant is going to implement an attendant assist operation, particularly at the Lackawanna lot, that will help distribute the actual parking demand across the 457 spaces that are proposed for this project.
Right. Counselor, I think it would be helpful before we go to any further questions, if you would put your other witness on to explain what how this parking management works, and then we can have combined questions of both witnesses.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
And I think we might even bring up Mr. Giosa to add his 4 cents in before we open up to questions, so that we can have all the questions about parking, in a consolidated fashion. Because I really want to understand how the parking's going to be managed. It sounds very complicated.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm a testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
Kristen Sokic, S-O-K-I-C-H.
Mr. Sokic, can you please describe to the board your current employment and position with that employer?
Sure. I work for ProPark America, and then you have the executive vice president.
And can you tell the board a little bit about ProPark America and some of its experiences, even in Montclair?
Sure. ProPark America has been in business for over 35 years. We're a parking management company. We operate over 500 locations across the United States in 17 different states, 69 or so different cities, 3,000 employees.
And you've been involved with other structured parking facilities in Montclair?
I have. So currently, my company operates the Valley and Bloom Orange Street Deck. We also manage parking at Mountainside Hospital. And previously, for the last 12 years, we ran the Crescent Street Deck and Bay Street Deck for the last 5 or 6.
And are you familiar with the term attendant assist as it's been used this evening in the context of parking solutions?
I am.
And can you explain for the board what is attendant assist?
Sure. So, sure, I could do that. I'm qualified, I think. So, attendant assist is different from valet in that you're not fully valeting the car for everybody. So we're in a like you go to a restaurant, you pull up, a valet takes your car, parks it, you give him a ticket, you come back and you get your car back. In an attendant assist environment, the first set of people that come in, and if there's self-park space available, they would park their cars themselves. Once that self-park capacity was fully maximized, we would then take over and valet park or assist the patron in parking cars in the aisle. Once that patron leaves, if somebody needs to take their car out that's self-parked, we'll move the vehicle that's parked in the aisle to allow them to do that and then repark the car in the self-park space. That's what attendant assist is.
And have you testified about attendant assist before this board in connection with any other projects in town? Possibly the Wellmont project?
Yes, Wellmont and quite possibly Orange Street Deck.
Okay. And during the course of your experience in the field of parking solutions, have you supervised attendant assist operations?
I have.
Yeah. And have you been qualified before this planning board in the past to testify in the field of parking solutions?
I have.
Mr. Chairman, I asked that Mr. Sokic be qualified as an expert in the field of parking solutions.
Yes.
Thanks. Now, Mr. Sokic, you're familiar with the application that's the subject of tonight's hearing?
I am.
And you heard the testimony provided by Mr. DeSario regarding parking in connection with the application?
I have.
So in the context of Mr. DeSario's explanation of the use of attendant assist, as you just described it, in the Lackawanna lot, can you describe how that plan is going to work to address capacity issues?
Sure. So currently, the capacity in that lot is 30 self-park spaces. We would have an attendant located there from 8 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. in the evening. That attendant would...
How many days a week?
I'm sorry?
How many days a week?
6. I believe the medical office is closed on Sunday. We would be there from opening to closing for the most part. And the attendant would the first set of people that come in would get self-parked, and we figured we could fit 21 additional cars parking in the aisle spaces and various other areas within that parking envelope.
So this is just for the most western little,
This is for
the
that
small,
little tiny Lackawanna Plaza lot, correct?
And if operational needs were to require it on some occasions, could cars be moved to the, what we'll call the main part of the western parking, which is in front of the grocery store, or alternatively over to the surface parking on the east lot?
Sure, if we were ever to have a need to go over the capacity, we could take cars to the west lot or the east lot. But I think with the employees parking outside of Lackawanna Plaza, and due to the nature of medical office patrons having high turnover and short stays for the most part, unless it's like a dialysis or something like that, it should be, based on the numbers here, the numbers should work. If we're getting 21 in the aisle plus the 30, we should be able to meet the requirement of 45 and 50.
how are you going to manage when people don't park in the main part of the western lot like they're supposed to? Like when employees park there when they're not supposed to, and that western lot fills up. I mean, how, the little lot that's on the plaza
Yeah.
is really not in sight distance of that main lot.
Correct.
So how are you guys going to know when there's a problem over there?
So, okay.
And then when there is a problem, if there is a problem over there, because too many people who aren't supposed to be parking over there are parking over there.
Sure.
How are you going to manage it?
Very well. So this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be a managed operation. The employees, we're going to have their information on file on their vehicle. They're going to get decals. To the counselor's question earlier about how do they get in and out of the garage, they'll get credentialed if they're allowed to go in the garage. We'll do license plate inventories once a day with a little handheld gizmo. We have all the information on who the employees are. We'll know, since we're there at 8 a.m. and we've got other locations in town, I could have people even go to the location earlier to do an inventory. All that information gets stored.
You're going to do that inventory every day?
It's really not that hard.
That doesn't answer my question. Is that a yes?
Yes.
You're going to do a daily inventory of the parking?
Correct.
And what about those people who don't give you their car information, or only have a car maybe a couple of days a week because they don't have regular use of a car? And so they don't have a sticker,
Sure.
they don't want a sticker,
Sure.
but they're driving a few days and they park it there.
Great question. So, being that this is a supermarket, most people are going to be there less than 2 hours. When we do inventory, we're inventorying all those cars. We can do a second inventory. Anybody over 2 hours most likely isn't at the supermarket. We already have all the employees' information. We're working with the store owners in order to obtain, have them work with us to get the employees' information. And by virtue of, being able to do license plate recognition, hands-on management, and having the tools of the trade, we're going to be able to manage the facility.
How many people are you going to have there on a daily basis?
How many employees that, yeah.
From your?
Yeah.
You
It's
said
not,
one, right?
It doesn't seem like, it's not as manpower intensive as you think. The attendant assist piece is very intensive, but in terms of managing vehicle inventories, I could have somebody go into that lot twice a day and it'll be efficient. Somebody goes in at 10, somebody goes in at 2.
Is there any other lot that you manage in Montclair that you do that now?
With license plate inventory?
Mm-hmm.
There's a place where that I have in Newark, out at the airport, we do license plate inventories. Right here, there's no need for it because everything that I manage is gated.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you pull a ticket or are credentialed, you can't park illegally anyway.
And what about part-time employees? Supermarket, grocery stores have part-time employees?
Yeah.
Right,
that-
normally
they're
4-hour shifts.
They're treated the same way? You're going to
Correct.
get all their information and...
Correct.
And who
So look at
manages...
all these
who-
retailers, like the earlier gentleman said, they're motivated. They don't want their employees to park in front of their store.
Of course not, of
So
course
they're
not. but-
eager to work with us.
Of course not, but sometimes it's raining and nobody wants to, they...
You know what,
that's-
90% of the time, it's not going to matter because capacity's not an issue, but we're going to manage it anyway, because that's what we do. But in the few times where it does matter, which is typically from Thanksgiving through New Year's, during any major holiday, 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, that's when the antennas are up and we're doing extra scrutiny.
Also, when you have snowstorms, and unless you're removing the snow, they had these big giant mountains of snow that take up 4 or 5 spaces. Often, so it effectively reduces the amount of surface parking that you have, and if you have shifts working at the supermarket that are part-time every 4 hours, you're really going to have to do your license plate check 4 times a day and not just twice a day. And it is a little bit labor intensive. It sounds like it's a lot more than just having a parking attendant.
I've been doing this 25 years. For the amount of space that you have here, you could do an inventory with a little handheld that zaps the license plate. You could do that whole lot probably in 20 minutes.
400 spaces?
400 spaces. Now, mind you, we're already controlling Lackawanna Plaza. We're already controlling the indoor lot at the residential building. So what really needs to be inventory?
Yeah, I'm only talking about that outdoor in front of the supermarket.
20 minutes.
That's 197 spaces.
So if you do come across a car that's not supposed to be there, what happens to that employee? Do they get a ticket or a warning, or
they get towed, or
do they get towed?
We'd have to discuss what the protocol should be with ownership, the applicant, the store owner. You know, it could be as simple as a warning, a friendly notice, a boot, a tow. It depends on what kind of protocol they want to put in place.
That's also true if you have just a customer that overstays, they park their car and they go shopping elsewhere.
So I would say typically in this scenario, you would not, if you have a first-time violator, you're not going to boot that car. You're not going to tow that car. You might leave a friendly notice saying, hey, we noticed your car's been parked here all day. The limit is 2 hours or something like that. And with the license plate recognition, you're able to save that person's vehicle information. So if that was your car and you, by accident, left the car there, or you got tied up, maybe your friend picked you up for lunch after you went food shopping and you didn't come back, all that data is stored in the handheld. So if you come back a couple of days later and do the same thing, we know, oh wow, Carmel, this is the second time this week, and then we progress it.
So then what do you do if I'm, if I'm a customer?
So maybe the protocol says the first violation is a friendly notice on your windshield. The second violation is we throw a boot on your car. Third violation is, the tow company's down the block. You'll have to go visit the guy down there. Really depends on what ownership wants to put in place or what your ordinance is.
Are the medical office building patrons going to be forbidden from parking in the lot that's in front of the supermarket, or they can park wherever they want to?
No, they could park in front of the supermarket.
And just a question with that. So if you have a medical office building, you have a lot of times people drive up and they drop off a person who might be, using a walker or something. Do you have a space there for that kind of just drop off and leave? Or drop off just and then go park someplace else? How does that work? If you have your full capacity in that the little Lackawanna Plaza lot of, what are you saying, 50 instead of 30 spaces?
It's currently 30 self-park.
How do you drop somebody off?
It'll be 21.
So
we'd have to make allowance. I mean, look, we're going to have somebody there that there'll be enough space to pull in and pull out adequately. But, if somebody was expecting to do like a K-turn or something a little crazy, then the valet would have to, jump in, probably move a car or two. But
so you're saying peak season is December, so you have a major snowstorm, you have...
For retail,
shopping.
But medical is different.
Yeah, okay.
I think that leads to a good question.
Yeah.
Do you have a map showing where you would park the extra cars in the lot over on Lackawanna Plaza to ensure if somebody wanted to drop off that there would be a clear circulation pattern under the vehicle assist or the...
So the answer is no, we don't have an exhibit, and I suppose actually it's a question we should take under advisement. I'm not sure the way that's been proposed right now, other than what I think Mr. Sokas just testified to, which is the assist parker would move cars out of the way if somebody needed to literally go to the door, but a clear circulation path if you actually were maxed at the...
So, I mean, just
I guess I just want to see where you're going to be parking the
But
cars.
that's a fair
Kind of refreshing. If we had to make an allowance for pickup and drop off, then the tandem assist would likely, we'd lose 2 spots because we'd have to
Okay,
leave
well,
a certain area.
I would really want to see on the
You'd wanna see it
plan
up
where
there,
you would
sure.
park those extra cars.
And realistically speaking, this is a medical office building. There are going to be drop-off, you know,
And
rather than
perhaps an
having
ambulance,
I'm
too.
not
an
saying they're not
ambulance,
gonna be. I
and
just-
if
we
you
do
mentioned
plenty of medical
dialysis,
centers.
dialysis people are brought in as they are at Mountainside Hospital in a van. And the vans tend to wait around at Mountainside Hospital because, you know, they're paid to wait.
You're absolutely right, and a lot of it's going to be predicated on what kind of practices are in there. So, you know, if you have a pediatrician who's seeing little kids all day, you know, there's probably going to be a lot of quick in and outs, but like you said, if you have a dialysis and somebody gets dropped off and they're going to be there for 4 or 5 hours, it's a different scenario. So, in essence, the attendant that is controlling that lot is not just doing tandem assist, but it's really managing the whole traffic flow and the parking that takes place. So he's doing a couple of different things at the same time. Or she.
And then it snows.
Then a lot of people don't go to the medical office.
Well, if they need dialysis, they do.
Well, they do, yeah.
I would hope that the overflow of traffic from medical office or anything would not go in the west lot. I would think that shoppers who want to go grocery shopping, the lot is full if it looks full. It'd be awfully hard to have the parking spaces in the west lot. I think your major problem is the west lot. And if you're going to use that as your overflow lot for some of the cars from the medical office, I think that would make the west lot less attractive for the supermarket patron.
It's really just a function of manpower. So the west lot's a little bit more convenient if we're going to Lackawanna Plaza, and 11 out of the 12 months a year, I don't see being an issue, other than the peak holiday season, where most likely we would have to direct cars to the east lot.
I would think that the amount of cars in the west lot would probably be the best gauge if it's already somewhat crowded. I don't want to spend too much time on it, and I feel like I'm spending more time than I need to perhaps, but I really would like to see the parking plan be more generous toward the supermarket, the needs of the supermarket than I hear.
I have a
Okay.
two more questions. One, on the parking management plan that was submitted, the tables in here say that there's reserved 130 residential spaces. Are those the underground spaces? And then there's the shared 100 surface lot spaces.
So
So
the
is this- are you
130 is the capacity of the garage, and the 100 is the capacity of the outdoor space around the
But
residential.
according to this table, the shared spaces are in the outdoor section.
You could safely accommodate all the shared parking in the outdoor section without ever needing to allow anybody else to go into the garage other than residents, if that was the policy.
So I guess I just want to firm this up. I mean, the plan
Yeah,
says.
Janice, I think maybe it's a typo, maybe the wrong word, but I see where you're pointing out where it says shared in the one space and reserved in the other. I think the misnomer is the 130 spaces are reserved in terms of, you know, you need a fob or some sort of access to go through the gate to get to them, but there is an intent that some of those spaces are shared in the sense
Okay.
that, and it, as indicated for, in this particular chart for 1 PM on the weekday peak, it shows Met Office employees parking in that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then my second question is, in Mr. Giosa's August 22nd report, he said that the west parcel parking areas will often be 100% occupied, saturated, which will translate to congestion and potential safety issues. So I know we talked about the parking assist for the medical office building, but I don't think we really talked about the saturation in the larger parking lot on the west parcel. You know, if it's going to be that saturated and create congestion issues and potential safety issues, how are you addressing that?
So, well, I should let Mr. DeSaria potentially, and maybe Mr. Giosa actually speak to this. I know there were communications actually between Langen Engineering and Mr. Giosa subsequent to the issuance of this report. Also, and some of those conversations concerned how attendant assist might facilitate an alleviation of I think some of that saturation, but there's a possible risk I'm speaking for
So
people who
maybe
really
this
should
is
say
a segue,
something.
Mr. Giosa, to have you explain how it was resolved to your satisfaction.
If it was resolved.
Right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
On the saturation point, I don't think there has been any real resolution. We didn't really discuss that. You know, your numbers are already saying that the demand is going to be higher than the supply, and as a result, that means people are going to be coming into the lot, and there's going to be no spaces for them to pull into. So as a result, I really think that you're going to have to pull as many people out of that west lot and the Lackawanna lot as possible, including all medical visitors. And that is, I had that conversation with Carl, that I believe that the medical office building should be 100% valeted and taken off-site. So taken onto the east parcel, which would open up the west parcel and open up the pickup drop-off in front of the medical office building as well. So that was kind of a conclusion that that I reached, and I let Langen know. And what I'm hearing tonight is not exactly that solution.
So if I understand, you wanted to keep the parking on the, over by Lackawanna Plaza as regular parking, and then the valet would be, they would be stacking those cars over on the east parcel. So
Correct.
that we're maintaining the supply, the free supply of parking on the east parcel.
Correct. And if you recall the medical office building over at Mountainside, they had that nice drop-off area with a canopy where the cars came around.
Right.
There was room for passing.
Right.
So the way the Lackawanna lot is laid out, you can kind of achieve that. There are two driveways.
Right.
That you can come through, and that's kind of the way I envision it being able to work. That you could drop people off, you can have your valet operation there, there's room for staging, but you would have to pull the cars now out and put them on the east parcel.
Right.
And that's going to require a chaser, or you're going to need the valet to either run back or walk back, or have another car follow him and drive him back.
So, can I?
Which is done.
I just want to say that I'm currently managing
running around in that area.
managing
You know?
3 medical centers that have larger square
Yeah,
footage
hospital
than
centers,
this.
yeah.
And we do attend and assist without any issues.
Yeah, that's
We
true.
manage the pickup and drop-offs, we do the parking of the vehicles, all within one area.
I don't think that was really the issue. I think the issue was the saturation for the rest of the parking, that there's no relief. What I'm hearing is you need a little bit more of a relief for the congestion, and that parking lot on Lackawanna Plaza would provide that relief if you could take all the parking associated with the medical office building and do it through a valet service on the east parcel. That's what I'm hearing from.
What I'm going to try and jump in here and hopefully help solve this, at least for the moment, is in fairness to Mr. DeSaria, who's covering for Mr. Pankey, he wasn't, I believe, a participant in the conversations with Mr. Giosa. I'm certainly not calling into question
That's
Mr.
correct.
Giosa's representation. There may be some confusion at the applicant level in terms of Mr. Pankey reporting to the applicant and then coming up with a solution to present tonight. So actually what I'm going to suggest is, since we're coming back anyway, then maybe we need to revisit this when we come back. And Mr. Joseph will obviously, I understand what you're saying, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Does the board have any further questions of any of these three parking witnesses?
I have one question. So when you talk about the parking assist, that would be for the underground parking or the surface parking?
The attendant assistant?
The attendant, yeah.
That's for the medical center.
No, no, and for the residents that are leaving, the 30% of the people who are leaving,
Yeah.
and you're going to use that parking.
So,
Is it
I'm
underground?
gonna try
Is
to
it
answer that
underground
question
or
real quick.
surface parking?
It's going to be a combination.
Earlier, there
combination.
was some question about ULI and is it national, regional?
Yeah.
We run the parking at Valley and Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
The ratio of cars to apartments is 0.86. Here, the requirement is one space to an apartment. So I don't think we're going to have any issue with accommodating any of the residents.
Okay, but what my real question is, when people rent their apartments, will you ask them, are they leaving for the day or they're not leaving for the day?
We're going to
And
know,
would you
like,
assign
within the first week
spots
that they
for
move
them?
in, we're going to know their habit.
Okay,
So.
but would you assign would you assign parking spaces,
No.
people who are leaving for the day down
No,
underground?
the best thing to do is to have
Can't
everything
guarantee
on a
that.
first-come, first-served basis.
Mhm.
This way you don't have empty spots that don't get used because it's reserved for somebody. And we're going to know their habits quickly. I mean, our people are going to be there monitoring, and we're going to be issuing the credentials. We're going to know who comes and goes and when they come and go.
And if you go first come, first served, the under of the building is going to fill up first. 100% of the time.
So when people rent an apartment, they can have indoor or outdoor parking? It's up to them, their assigned spot?
Whatever ownership wants.
Whatever's available. They don't
Oh,
get an
it's, oh, it's,
assignment.
I see.
If it's first-come, first-served, then
You have
if
to back in that lot, wherever there's an
somebody
open.
gravitates towards indoors, they're going to go indoors. If somebody likes being outside, they'll go outside.
Maybe I missed this. Is there going to be any kind of gate up and down? You'd have a sticker so that,
There's going to be a rider door,
Exactly.
garage door, high speed.
right, in and out. So
Yeah.
technically, an employee would have the same sticker to be able to then access, right?
No, so we could set credentials, right? So we could make it so the employee only has access Monday through Friday during the day. They'll have a separate type of decal in their car, so maybe the resident.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're going to have the exact, I'm saying if you're going to have a gate, the employee is going to be part of that system, whatever determination you make.
Yes.
So you
Correct.
can technically control the
Yes.
employees going in there.
That's correct, yep.
Right. In fact, you could force an employee to have that sticker on their car, right? So that it basically, somebody walking around the supermarket lot, if they saw an employee with a sticker,
You would
because they
know
have
that-
to have it to get over there sometimes, they'd be
Correct.
told, get out of there, you're in the wrong
Yeah.
place, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Did you mention that Valley and Bloom is not filled to capacity?
Yes.
Right. And is the inclusion of a parking spot at Valley and Bloom part of the lease that
No.
it's built in?
It's only if you want it.
So they only have to pay? And
Correct.
is the price of the lot, competitive? Or are people not
It's gonna
parking
be
there
similar to
because it's
whatever
not?
we're thinking about doing here.
Well, I had heard that the price of the lot was high and that people tend to park in the street because.
At Valley and Bloom,
Yeah.
it's the same rate that you charge at Crescent Street deck.
Okay, well, I don't know
That's
what that
publicly
is, but
run
that's.
by the city.
That's what I heard, that people tend not to
Yeah.
park there. They try to park in the street because it's much less expensive. Yeah.
I mean, there is a public lot across the street, but they do enforcement there, and to the chairman's point, most people like to park inside versus being outside.
Will the east parking lot surface, will that be controlled? Will you have a gate to control? Sorry about that.
No, it won't be access control.
How do you keep the public from parking over there?
Overnight.
Stickers.
Through enforcement. We're going to monitor the lot, and, if you're a monthly person, you'll be credentialed. I think it's envisioned to have paid parking on a transient basis for people that, are visiting or something like that.
And I assume Mr. Cesario is going to update the tables next time you come back?
Yeah, we can have them updated, yeah.
Because it seemed like what we have what was submitted was different from what was up on the screen, which was even different from some of the numbers that he testified to.
I think some of the, and I'll confess, some of this may relate to the confusion that I referenced before. I think some of those numbers were updated as a result. I thought of conversations with Mr. Joseph, but you know what, we'll get it all cleaned up for when we come back.
Yeah, I was having trouble following it. I just want to be clear that that will all be resolved next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wasn't the only one who had this.
Other questions from the board? All right, does any member of the public have questions for one of these three? Pardon? Do you have?
I'm a traffic engineer, so I don't know if I can qualify as public or not.
Come on up and ask the question.
Hi, Joe Fishinger with MB5. I'll keep this brief, but since they're rerunning the numbers, I had a few questions to make. I didn't want to have to make them do it twice. Dan, when you did your numbers, there was some question in the earlier testimony about some on-street parking spaces being lost or moved throughout the various portions of this. I know we've gone back and forth with the loading zone a number of times, and there were a few spaces involved in that. Do your numbers account for any losses and gains to on-street parking? And if not, can you, when you update the numbers, address that as well? I know they're not big numbers, but if you're fixing the numbers, I'd like you to have them all correct.
No, we're not accounting for any loss of on-street parking. I don't know how that would play into a shared parking analysis for the site, but we can inventory the lost parking that's on the street as a result of the curb cuts and any other changes.
And then my other question is, and I apologize in whose review letter this was in, there are cars parking on those lots now that are in the vacant lots. How is that, where are those cars going to go, and how is that going to be addressed?
Roaches?
I was just making a note for your first request. I don't necessarily know if it's incumbent upon the applicant to account for existing parking not associated with the existing users at the site. I think it's incumbent upon the applicant to put forth respectfully to this board and its professionals that the proposed parking supply is sufficient for what's proposed in terms of the development of this site. And that's what we've done.
My question was, where do those cars, you're already close to your end, you're close to capacity of the parking. Do you envision any of those cars parking on this site, and how would you control them? They're already doing it today. How would they be prevented from doing it in the future?
Actually, that might actually be Kristen. So that might actually be to
I
Kristen.
think that's going to be another one of those things that he's going to manage very easily, in fact.
Store the wheel locks.
Okay, so look, we're not bothering anybody now because there's so few tenants there, so it hasn't been an issue, and it's going to be a managed situation. You know, residents, they're going to have their 24-hour access. The food store folks, they'll, going to have a 2-hour limit most likely, and we're going to inventory the cars. The food store is going to close at a certain hour, so there's certainly not going to be any overnight parking taking place, at least, not legally. And the Lackawanna Plaza has its own business hours, which we're going to be managing 6 days out of the 7 days a week. So we're going to know who's parking there by virtue of us being there and interacting with the property manager at the residential building, the store manager at the supermarket, and the medical offices.
Those are the only questions I had with regard to parking.
Thank you.
Sorry, same way.
It's okay.
Frank Rabacki, 398 Upper Mountain Avenue. I just want to clarify, the
the period we're talking about is the first 4 weeks of December as far as the period that we're using the ULI numbers for? It's
Ye-
not the entire month, it's just the first 4 weeks.
In December, yes.
Okay. Just to stay on the ADA theme for a second, come back to it. You're putting all the employees over on the east parcel, and I want to know what kind of steps you were going to take above what's federally required to allow handicapped employees to park closer to where they were, rather than putting them on the other block.
I think if an employee is handicapped, they can certainly park in one of the handicap spaces near the front door.
But the way you have them set up, you have enough, by my understanding, you have enough handicap spaces, assuming you don't have any outpatient services in the medical office building, and I forgot what the other clause is that requires more parking, by the way. But I'm just saying, the way you have it set up, you have it in balance, so that more of it, it's allocated by lot. And so you're putting I think half your handicap spots on each lot, when you're gonna have 90% of your handicapped people working on the west lot. All I'm asking is to look at rebalancing. And maybe you do it with the tandem assistance. There's a number of ways around it, but you comply legally, but from a handicap point of view, you're not really coming up to the full spirit of the law. That's all I'm asking.
So on the Lackawanna Plaza side, because we're going to be offering attendant assist, that's actually a higher level of access and having a self-park handicap space, so that should not be an issue there.
I was hoping you were going to say that. Okay, thank you.
So employees and customers of the stores will be able to use that?
For Lackawanna Plaza, anybody going to that building that's handicapped, we're going to be providing a higher level of access by having attendant assist.
Right.
So all I'm saying is, in that portion, it's not really an issue. And I think we could address what he's talking about in the main west lot. If there are employees that are handicapped, obviously, they're going to be permitted to park in handicap spots.
Well, and you have to take into consideration, too, there may also be employees who don't qualify for a state handicap sticker, but that the store has to make an accommodation for under the ADA because they have limitations on the distances that they can walk. That situation may come up.
Sure, and if it does, we're happy to make accommodations.
I noticed on the numbers in the Langen report, there was no mention tonight about non-captive demand. So my question is, why is non-captive demand at 100%? Why is it at something less than 100%?
I like that move. He just kind of like looked over and sighed. It's on you.
If we accounted for non-captive demand, which basically says, as an example, if somebody worked off-site in an office building and walked over to the restaurant on this site, you could actually reduce the parking supply on our site to account for that person that was off-site and already accounted for in terms of overall area parking demand at the office building they work in. So we elected not to include any non-captive reductions to provide a more conservative analysis.
I thought non-captive was when somebody went to the medical office building and then went over to the restaurant for lunch afterwards.
That's also part of non-captive demand.
Okay, so.
And it would reduce the overall parking that would be required.
Right. So I don't understand if you have a restaurant specifically. You broke it out, you took a shopping center and you said, this is the factor for a shopping center. I get that. People go to a shopping center, they make multiple stops. The medical office building, as I understand it, the factor you're using is for a standalone medical office building. It doesn't take into account it's in a shopping center or an urban area. It's just a standalone building. So it's like Mountainside. You drive there. You don't do anything but that's where the numbers come from. So And then you have the restaurant, which is not part of the shopping center in your numbers. It's not by the office. Yes, it should give that, is what I'm saying. So there's no overlap shown in your numbers that says somebody's going to go to the restaurant that's either going to the medical office building or is going to the shopping center, which is 90% of your demand.
Correct. And we elected not to do that, to put forth the conservative analysis. So our shared parking analysis is likely estimating higher requirements than what will actually happen in reality. And our position is, and one thing I neglected to say, the ULI numbers in terms of the parking supply ratios for various land uses, baked into those numbers is about a 5 to 10% cushion to allow for people, for a supply that's a little more than actual demand, to allow people that are searching for an empty parking space. So, respectfully, I stand before you, and I believe the supply is going to be appropriate. In instances where demand may exceed overall supply, particularly on the west side, that's why we have the parking, the active parking management plan by virtue of the gentleman that spoke to you this evening.
So you're saying the actual occupancy rate doesn't equal the effective capacity?
No, demand is one thing and capacity is another.
No, I'm talking about effective capacity. The effective capacity, as I understand it, is you have, say, on-street parking. The target supply for on-street parking is 85%. You want 85% of capacity so you can allow for people circulating, finding spaces, hiring lots and things like that. So you always want, you don't want the effective capacity you need to prevent the circulation and all that stuff to equal occupancy. And what you have in the west lot is your effective capacity is equaling your occupancy rate. It's the same thing, there's no buffer. But now you're saying there's a 5 to 10% buffer in there that is in all these numbers.
The occupancy rate that ULI puts forth. So for instance, ULI says
Let's
provide.
Let's take a restaurant.
No, I'm going to answer your question.
Let him finish his statement.
So for instance, ULI says for a shopping center, provide 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. In that 4 per 1,000, there is an inherent cushion of about 5 to 10%, meaning the actual demand would be less than that suggested parking supply ratio.
And that's the same for each one of the factors you used in the report?
Correct.
Okay. So all of them have 5 to 10% buffer built in?
Correct.
Okay. That would be the effective capacity of the occupancy rate. So if you had a demand, if your ULI said you needed 100 spaces, the reality was ULI says you actually need 90, but we built in 5 to 10 more spaces in there, so you have 95 to 100. So we have extra capacity in these 434 numbers. Yeah, we have 5 to 10% built in, right?
Yes, the actual demand will be less than the suggested parking supply ratios.
This is if you take out the buffer.
Correct.
The other thing I want to ask, and I'm not sure who to ask, but since we have all these parking people, you're taking the Lackawanna Plaza lot, which is 30 spaces, and you're going to put 20 more spaces in there, make it 50. Then you're going to have 197 spaces in Bloomfield Avenue and in part of Grove Street. Then you're going to have a wall. Then you're going to have a loading area. Then you're going to have the adjacent property owner, and then you're going to come back to the parking lot with 50 cars in it. And the planning board has stated previously, they want Lackawanna Plaza retail, the entrance to be on the Lackawanna Plaza.
Frank, nobody is fucking following this line of thinking. You got to hone in on what you want to say.
What I'm trying to say is you're taking the one area besides
the area that's in front of the retail is going to be parking that's devoted
to...
to...
one massive parking lot. 50 spaces when there should only be 30. and now you can't make this place any uglier than it is. So, do you follow me now?
I got it.
Okay.
That's a good visual.
One ugly plan. So you're gonna put 50 spaces there.
No, you're gonna have 30 sub-park spaces, but we're gonna fit 50
You're
cars.
gonna put 50 cars, I'm
in
sorry.
the same envelope.
You're technically correct, and I'm technically wrong. Okay, so you're gonna put 50 spaces, okay. I just want that point to be clear. The other thing I don't understand is, if the other 48 weeks out of the year, you have excess capacity in the west lot, why wouldn't you put the, what do you call it, the assisted parking?
Attendant assisted.
Attendant assisted parking in the west lot. Take the part of that lot that's close to the Bloomfield Avenue that no one parks in, because they're going to try to park as close to the grocery store and retail as possible. That's the part that's going to be empty the other 11 months out of the year.
It's not convenient to the folks that are going to the medical center. So now they're gonna have to walk around the property to get to the front entrance.
But you said if you go to Pig and Prince, which is going to have 50 cars.
Pig and Prince currently, I believe, is only open for dinner. It's gonna be a great shared use.
I'm glad you
So
said
when the
that.
medical center is closed,
So we
there'll
don't
be
count,
plenty
so
of
we
parking.
don't count the Pig and Prince as 50 spaces at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
I suppose. Are they open for lunch?
No, they're not.
That's the way it currently is, but it
That's
could be.
50 spaces you put in the numbers that should be in the numbers for 1 o'clock.
They're open for brunch on Sundays, I know that.
Yeah, that's
Sunday, the medical center is closed.
That's included in the analysis.
Yes, this wasn't specific to Pig and Prince. This was based on a restaurant that could be open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Let me ask you a question. Do you understand what my point was?
Yes.
Yep.
So, I'm sorry, which
Thinks there's
expert
too
are
much
we
parking.
following?
Yeah.
Ask your question, and then
That's
we'll
exactly it.
see which one is appropriate to answer it.
Hey, guys, can I jump in for a second? When you're the developer and you have an ordinance that requires a certain amount of parking, what they're trying to do is they're trying to give us the proofs to justify the parking variance and to say that this site's going to function. And I believe, if I've been following you throughout, you're concerned about that there might be too much parking on this site.
What I'm
Well-
concerned about is we have a Goldilocks parking problem.
Well, one thing, though, that even though the Pig and Prince is only open for limited hours, it's a restaurant, it could be something else next month, and I think when we look at the application, we should look at the application on the basis of a restaurant that might be open for lunch, that might be open, so I think it's appropriate.
That would be my understanding, it's a restaurant use.
Right,
then
and I think that's-
It
and
could
I-
actually be a family restaurant.
Right, and I think that's what they said they did.
Okay.
Yes.
So now I have the question, I'm sorry. You're using the Pig and Prince space, the town requires it based on tables, on seats, basically dining tables and bar seats. You switched it to all Pig and Prince, and now it's all table seating, 197 table seats, I understand. They've eliminated the bar seat, 31 bar seats. The requirement is 73 parking spaces. They occupy roughly 5,700 square feet of space for those seats. They use about 1,800 square feet for storage. My point is, this goes to a family restaurant where they have 73. They're going to use a ULI factor, not on the 5,700 they currently are using. They're going to use it on the larger 7,700, which is effectively ramping up the parking demand in the retail use in addition to converting the general office building to a medical office. So I just want to make sure that I understand this, and I want to make sure, if I understand it, that the planning board understands it, that you're dramatically increasing by about 30% the size of the restaurant, based on that logic. Is that accurate?
Yes, we identified the parking demand based on the gross square footage of the restaurant. That is correct.
And then, I think that will do it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one other quick thing. Mr. DeSerio, next time you come back, can you just be prepared to speak a little bit about what an average month might look like for parking demand?
I can. But if you wanted to look at it now, it's in the back of the report.
Even better. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Want me to say no Tuesdays?
This is one question, I promise.
Okay.
So the 4 weeks in December is the peak period. There was a question raised about off-site parking. I just wanted to point out, are you aware that the township bags all the meters from the first 4 weeks of December every year? And that there are 53 spaces around the Lackawanna Plaza lot that are underutilized by the parking study that was done at the time that the Pathmark closed. So we have a baseline of what it was before there was really any substantial stuff going in there.
I'm not aware that the township bags those meters. However, again, respectfully, it's incumbent upon the board and the applicant to demonstrate that the on-site parking supply is adequate to accommodate the demand that the project will generate, and we've done that.
That's fine, but I'm just asking your expert opinion. Sorry, second question.
Thank you.
John Reimnitz, 189 Highland Avenue, Montclair. I'm so confused with all the numbers. I don't think I'll ever park here. I'll just Uber here. And by the way, I don't own a car, so there are many people who don't.
Uber.
You said, according to the numbers, you would be, if you just went by the code, you'd be required to have 851 spaces? Is that what I heard?
Excluding TD Bank, 817 parking spaces are required by ordinance.
Okay, and you're providing total 457.
Correct.
And you're saying, based on your shared parking analysis, 434 are needed.
Correct.
So your testimony is you actually have 23 more than you think you need?
Correct.
Correct. Do you think you actually need less than that? I understand all the analysis, but my opinion is that there's way too many cars, but that's, do you think you could get away with less cars?
No.
Is there a logic behind it? Do you believe you need the 434 cars?
Yes.
Okay.
Parking spaces, not cars.
Parking spaces, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Well, cars, parking, yeah.
Parking spaces.
Yes, parking,
spaces,
right.
okay. The 197 spots in front of the store, they've been allocated how? Are they all allocated towards the supermarket? No, I'm sorry, just.
No, those spaces are available to anyone that parks there. All of the retail employees and the medical office employees will park on the east parcel lot. So those spaces in front of the grocery store as well as the other retailers would be available for customers.
So all the retail is allocated in that 197, or the 197 is allocated towards all the retail?
Correct.
In that, okay.
Correct.
Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Other questions from the public? Okay. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. How many, for the apartment building, how many visitor spots are there for people coming, if you're coming to visit your aunt, or your aunt's coming to visit you? How many visitor spots allocated that say visitors?
I think our intention is not to designate any of the parking spaces. They would all be available in terms of the surface parking for visitors and residents.
How will you regulate that?
But I thought people will have stickers. I thought people were having stickers and fobs and.
So, I think per the code, the one vehicle per dwelling unit is inclusive of factoring in visitors that may come to the building. In this scenario, it's envisioned that the visitor spaces would be in the outdoor envelope around the building.
And anybody can come and visit? Is there a sticker,
Yeah,
a visitor
tutors.
sticker, or?
So, the concept we were talking about was to have a pay station and an area for visitor parking.
A pay station? A pay station?
For visitors.
Oh.
And just to be clear, the code's not one space per unit.
1.1?
1.8, 2.0, and 2.1.
For apartments?
Yeah,
This is-
multifamily
this
dwelling
is-
use.
Yeah, this is RSIS. That's the state regulates the parking requirements. I think this was just, what were you?
I know Mr. DeSerio referenced some, redevelopment plans that have been approved here in the town that were closer to 1.1, but the ordinance is closer to 2.0.
Okay, what,
I just want to be clear.
that's fine. Just speaking from experience, though, Valley and Bloom, the ratio's 0.86 to apartments.
And is that 0.86 per occupied apartment?
Correct.
Okay.
I just heard something that I'm a little confused about. You're saying there's a separate parking lot for visitors where they have a paid system? Is, what, say that again? I was a little
I'm
confused.
saying that the visitors will park in the outdoor portion of the parking envelope around the residential building.
But that access is not free access. It has to be, it's regulated by some sort of...
It's up to ownership.
I'm just a little confused as to how
I
that...
think he spoke off the cuff, and that's not something that's totally worked out with ownership as to how they're going to regulate visitor parking, because nobody's really thought that one through yet. Am I correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we may have to come back to you on that one.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So thank you. I think we're done with the parking witnesses. I want to call up members of the HPC so that we can kind of clarify where we're going with the HPC's presentations and new reports. So John, David, Kathleen, can you guys come up and talk to us while we're still awake?
Can you send me a memo?
So, Kathleen Bennett, HPC. I was asked to call a special meeting of the HPC by members of the HPC to discuss the newest site plan of this development of Lackawanna Plaza, and basically two major considerations came out of that meeting. One was one was the consideration that two of our members created a new site plan that actually spoke to the concerns, many of which we've heard tonight, the parking, the pedestrian, the biggest thing, which is really the loss of the train sheds and the demolition, and how the demolition of that historic fabric is contra to both the historic preservation ordinances and also the master plan of the township of Montclair. We've written reports about the historic significance. You've heard all of our testimony about how significant it is as a building, how significant it is to the history of Montclair, to the residents, to all the wards, especially the 4th Ward, if that landmark was to be demolished. I mean, the 4th Ward has lost 3 or 4 major historic sites in the past few years. So two of our members, one who's a registered architect, came up with a alternate design scheme. We're endorsing this as an alternate design plan. We're not endorsing this as the only design plan.
HPC is endorsing.
Exactly. John and David have an abbreviated section. Okay, okay. And then the other thing that we were concerned about is not only the demolition of the historic fabric, but also the parking lot and the way the parking lot has grown with this newest site plan, and how that affects the historic nature of the neighborhood down there, the historic nature of the central business district, that we will now have a parking lot that's really the size of a parking lot that is one of the big box stores out on Route 46. And this is something that John and David have shown us in their visuals, in their images with the presentation. They do have an abbreviated portion of this that they're ready to speak to tonight.
So, John, you wanted to say something?
Sure.
Uh-huh.
The abbreviated little presentation was attached to the amendment to the resolution. I don't know if you guys received that. And did you get the images that were attached to that? You
Yes,
did.
they did.
Okay. We would actually prefer.
Do I have a copy? Yeah.
We have like a 30-minute presentation that we'd like
Do I have
to.
what?
I sent it to you.
Yeah, yes, I do.
I sent it to them.
So,
I think it would be more valuable because we have more evidence and more information to back up those 7 sheets that were attached to the amendment. We would.
So I know that you and David were interested in presenting opposition, and these 7 slides are part of your larger presentation that you. So is it that now that opposition has now come under the fold of the HPC's recommendation to the planning board?
Yes.
Okay. So when did you, Counselor, when did you get a copy of their report?
Friday afternoon.
Okay.
Well, the HPC
Yeah.
memo. We learned about the HPC meeting, reading it in the newspaper after it happened.
Okay. All right.
We would.
You were notified?
No.
Well, I'm sorry, the planning office, that was one thing
Oh,
I spoke to.
I'm sorry. If you're referring to the notice in the newspaper that the HPC did have a special meeting that took place at 5:30 p.m. However, that notice doesn't indicate the purpose of the meeting, and certainly we weren't monitoring the newspapers to see if the HPC was going to meet again on our application after having considered in excess of 12 hours of testimony, and then issued a report, and then issued a second report, and now we get a third report 6 months later.
All right, so let me just.
I would prefer.
Whoa, we can.
Hold on, please.
No.
Okay.
First the board goes.
It seems to me that the applicant feels they did not receive adequate notice. There's a longer presentation. It's 11:30 now. It seems to me that the applicant should study the information in the interim period and let them come back and present.
That is what I wanted to suggest, and I wanted to understand just how your previous, what you had indicated as previous, now fits in this new scheme, so that we can deal with it in the most efficient fashion. And I think that, if you've got a half-an-hour presentation, that in all fairness to the applicant, that they should have time to study it, and we can present it, if we can do this at the top of the next meeting, and give the applicant time to.
We would prefer that they see, we'll give them the whole presentation tonight, a copy of it, because it's.
And I think that would be best. And then if you have questions, or you feel the need to present additional testimony, then you'll have time to deal with that.
Then the whole presentation should go to Ms. Talley as well, for distribution to the board.
We have them ready. We can do that tonight. I also want to add, we think it would be.
Electronically.
Electronically, we can do that. I think we also felt it would be helpful to have Bruce Stevie and the architectural team here during the presentation.
From the HPC?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think the applicant indicated they're going to be here next time, so that would be perfect.
Sure. I mean, I have to state for the record, we actually object to all of this. Again, I have actually reviewed a video of the HPC meeting that it's on YouTube. It's not on the township website, but it appears that the purpose of the HPC meeting, it seems to be acknowledged tonight, was to allow for 2 individual members of the HPC who wanted to make presentations to this board at a prior hearing, and were told that they would need to wait until the public portion of the application to make a presentation. Use the HPC as a way of doing that. Again, we weren't notified. We're surprised to learn about it, and at least it appears to be acknowledged that there wasn't a referral specifically from the planning board for the HPC to supplement its record. So pursuant to the HPC's bylaws, as well as the township ordinances or otherwise, there was no authority or jurisdiction to actually conduct that meeting. particularly since the applicant wasn't invited or not even notified that it was taking place. We believe any discussions or recommendations to be delivered to this board by the HPC as a result of that meeting are null and void and should be disregarded by this board. To the extent that this board is going to consider the recommendations, obviously we'll reserve our right to comment further in conjunction with that. But we do note that a lot of what's been, I believe, is going to be presented concerns testimony that's been extensively explored in front of this board by the applicant's expert, Robert Volleson, as well as the board's consultant, Bradley Knabb, who spoke to a lot of the issues regarding what can be done in terms of supermarket operations. Frankly, there's been nothing discussed to my knowledge that's going to be presented that hasn't already been discussed or couldn't have been discussed at a prior HPC meeting that took place earlier this year. And frankly, to ask the rhetorical questions, is anybody in the planning board unaware that the members of the HPC wouldn't prefer that the interior mall be demolished? I think we all know what the answer to that is. So based on the following, we don't believe that it's appropriate to consider particularly site design testimony of HPC members regarding traffic, circulation, parking. It's frankly beyond the scope of the HPC's mission. But all that being said, Mr. Chairman, I think I understand where you're going with this.
What if what if instead of presenting as the HPC, they're presenting as objectors for the community?
It's not the right time in the application, though.
Oh, but I know that. But wasn't my question.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm addressing your objection to the appropriateness.
Sure. So to the extent we pretend that meeting didn't happen and no resolutions.
Well, no, the meeting happened, but they've gone beyond their authority as the HPC, such as it is, and so they're not going to present their evidence to us as members of the HPC. Rather, they are exercising their right to present evidence as citizens of the town who just happen to be trained and have this interest in historic preservation. Does that really get around your objection, Counselor?
Well,
don't they have the right to do that?
Well, the answer is, I suppose, as members of the HPC, they have a right to ask questions and comment as if they're residents of the township.
What about to formally object, though? That's my question.
Well,
not as because HPC is HPC is a consultant to the board, and so we hear things from them as consultants to the board, maybe this goes a little bit beyond what a consultant would do, but don't they have the right to do that and present as an objector like any other citizen of the town?
Well, the only concern I potentially have, and maybe it makes sense to have them as the HPC as opposed to objectors in light of all that's taken place, is the fact that you have an HPC body which has members supposedly providing independent evaluation of an application and then expressing personal objections to the application, which draws into question whether or not one should or shouldn't have recused from adjudicating on a particular issue.
Well, I mean, HPC doesn't really adjudicate issues insofar as the recommendations that they're giving to the planning board. They make recommendations to us. We're the ones who have the power to adjudicate.
Yeah.
And, doesn't it really go to the weight of how we consider whatever testimony that they provide, all those issues that you're raising?
Well, it is an advisory body, but I do note their bylaws do incorporate the local government ethics law as well as the same municipal land use law conflict laws that apply to this board.
Sure, but if they stop being the HPC and they become a group of citizens,
so again,
doesn't that?
So again, I feel like we're sparring over an academic point, I suppose.
I'm just I'm just creating the record.
Yeah. Well, at the one level, I think it's. If the HPC wants to make recommendations to this board and this board wants to choose to accept them, then they make their recommendations. On a separate level, if HPC does not meet and however individuals on that board want to appear and state their comments and questions in part of this procedure, that's okay. I'm a little bit concerned about the crossover where on the one hand you're appearing as the HPC and then you're simultaneously appearing as an objector, and that's what I'm trying to navigate, I think, right now.
Okay. And on that note, We'll come back to this at our next meeting on this matter, which is when, Janice?
October 29th.
October 29th.
I do have one comment.
I'm not going to be here.
Oh, dear.
Going to be in California.
To you, Keith.
There's a chance I may not be here either.
Oh, dear.
Get another night.
Let's reschedule it the week
And
before.
I may not be here that night either.
The 22nd?
Yes. I
We
won't,
have some
I
time
won't
on
know
the
until right around that time. Personal
Yeah, I'll be here on the
commitments.
22nd, but I know I'll be on the West Coast on the 29th and 30th.
And let's reschedule it to the 22nd. We have a regular meeting on the 15th, because the 8th is a holiday, and we'll schedule this on the 22nd.
Is that okay with the rest of the board? Counselor, is that okay with you? Yeah. You won't be here?
Columbus Day.
Columbus Day?
So, Mr. Chairperson, when we come back for October 22nd, how will the presentation, under which guise will it?
Why don't you guys give some thought to that? And see what you can do to sort it out during the interim, and we'll give it some additional thought too. But, you know, it's up to you how you want to present. You know, I can't tell you. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands exactly how the information is coming in to the board.
Okay. Is there a particular concern you want to?
No, I don't think it's appropriate for me to address that.
I want to say this, and I have to choose my words carefully, because I think we're at one of those times in a proceeding where a judge will be looking at this very, very closely. I think the premise on which you want to get our attention is that something you're offering you need to tell us now, because it's going to materially alter what the developer does. If it's not going to materially alter what the developer is going to do, then I strongly recommend that you hold your powder to the objector's part of this case and then present it then. Because you shift from a role of being helpful to design to being in a role where maybe you don't approve of the, and we're not going to always agree. We want to reach consensus, but we're not always going to reach a consensus. And it's not our call. It's not the board's call if there's any interest. So I think you should have a conversation with Mr. Troutman between here and the next meeting about what they may or may not do in consideration of what you've put together.
And I think you should also talk to Mr. Karasik.
Excuse me, Mr. Karasik was at our meeting, and he did.
But you should talk to him in
light of
terms
what you
of...
heard
Right.
tonight.
Okay,
in
well, I
terms of what
just wanted to
happened
make
this
that
evening.
point and be on the record that he was at our meeting. And the other thing I'd like to be on the record.
I'm sure I'd be very grateful that you pointed out that he was at that meeting. I know I would be.
Should also be grateful to know that he didn't return our phone calls.
Counselor, before the chair of the HPC continues there, and isn't there a case law, because I know that the applicant's attorney just made some objections, isn't there a case law that judges have ruled that the conflict of interest is really one of a business or personal one, not really the mind or beliefs of the individual, that the court gives wide discretion on board members' opinions, pre-thoughts, ideas as it relates to their participation and their role, but short of having a business conflict or some kind of personal conflict with a tie to somebody personally, that's really the issue, because it seems to me Please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it seems to me that he was trying to make a linkage that somehow, if they came to the table with some ideas already prejudged, or they brought their opinions as residents to the table as part of their service for the HPC, and then viewed that in their commentary, that somehow was a conflict, and that's not what I've read whatsoever.
it's not our place to determine whether or not the Historic Commission members have a conflict. My concern is whether any of our board members have a conflict. Okay, I'd have to think that allegation through. Do I, from the first moment, think you're probably right? They're advocating for historic structures, whether they advocate for it, as the chairman said, as an objector or as the historical commission. However, our concern all the way through this hearing, we've been, I think this board has been fantastic in listening to the public to get every single issue that you can absorb. And this is a tough case. We have varied interests that compete with each other, and all of them have merit. I've never seen anything like this. So it's tough enough as it is for you. But the question is, at the end of the day, if we approve something and the developer's happy, everybody goes their way. If we turn down this case somehow, I got to be careful about the record that we're creating. And while we're being considerate of the public to listen to everything and make every change we can, a judge may look at this and look at the conduct of the Historic Commission, no matter how honorable, no matter how well-intentioned, and say maybe it's not a fair hearing. And what counsel's suggesting is they're having a hearing, and he should have been invited, possibly. So we need to be alert to the potential risk of that.
Right. And then, as I said before, I think my opinion at the moment is that I think it really goes to how we receive the information, not whether we receive the information.
I
But
agree.
that's what I want to think about. That's what I want to give some thought about. So I think what we need to do now is to close the hearing, and then as Counselor suggested, you should have some discussions with Ira and such, because I don't think it's appropriate for us to tell you how to present what you're going to present. It's incumbent upon us, though, to make a determination as to how we receive it.
Understood.
Or when.
And when.
Oh,
And
when.
when. So at this point, I want to close the hearing, and we'll be back on the 22nd.
No, we're closing the hearing.
Closing the hearing.
You got to show respect to the tribunal.
Okay.
Right. We'll be back on the 22nd, and for this matter, and there won't be any further notices that are issued to the public on it. And
Do you waive the time which the board has to act?
We do.
Okay.
okay, all right,
Thank you.
all right. Thank you. And do we have bills?
We do. But I have no objections to the bill.
Okay.
I would move to approve it.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.